Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for joining us. I think there's maybe a slight confusion because we had the comment pinned up saying from last week when we couldn't do the show. So I'm a bit worried that everybody's going to think we're still not doing the show today. But Jazakallah khair for the brothers who are joining us. And yes, man, we've got Jake. Alhamdulillah. Salams, bro. How's things?
Wa alaikum assalam. Good, alhamdulillah. How's everything?
Alhamdulillah, good, man. You broke from the tradition. No red.
Yeah, man. It's football season, so I'm wearing my Jet stuff.
All right, alhamdulillah. How's things been anyway? Because we're constantly getting messages. Where's Jake? Where's Jake? How's things been anyway?
Yeah, been good, alhamdulillah. Just been busy, but everything's good, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah, that's good. We've also got Abdulrahman here on the show, but I think he's busy as well. Yusuf's actually in Turkey, is with the Sapiens Institute retreat program that they're running there at the moment. So I think for the audience, if you've noticed, there's not been as many streams like Hamza's Den. You were meant to be on Hamza's Den, weren't you, this Friday? Or last Friday, gone.
Yeah, but I think he had to cancel.
Yeah, because he's at the retreat as well. I texted him. I said, I thought you guys were on today. And he was like, no, he's at the retreat. So I think there's a lot of brothers that are at that retreat who normally run live streams. And so there's probably been in the last, couple of weeks or whatever it is, or a week or so, that a few streams that have not been on. But we're on. That's the main thing. And today's topic that we're going to be discussing is about the appeal to mystery. Now, why do we talk about this particular topic? Well, number of things, really. One, a lot of people, I sense, don't understand the difference between appealing to mystery and trying to, and the necessity or the need to explain a logical contradiction. They conflate these two things together. So they basically see that something is an apparent logical contradiction, and they'll just jump to appealing to a mystery. Yeah, and we'll maybe go into more explanation in terms of what we mean by this. Or on the other hand, sometimes when people appeal to mystery, it's assumed that they're appealing to something that's a contradiction when it's not a contradiction. If you understand what we're saying. Hopefully that's clear, but we'll explain it further. So it's really important, and maybe just to give a very brief example, isn't it? Some people, like for example Christians, they will talk about the logical problem of Trinity, and one of the responses that some Christians will have is to say, well, it's a mystery. It's, we can't understand it. We can't understand the nature of God. Therefore, we're warranted and justified in believing something that might not necessarily make sense, because it's a mystery. Yeah, so that's the topic today. Jake, I don't know if you've got any particular, I know I've got specific questions, but any general thoughts about this as an introduction to help the audience understand this particular topic and why it's important?
Not really, other than just sort of repeating the points you already made, which are, we want to make a distinction between what a mystery is and what a contradiction is. People need to understand the difference between the two, and when it may be appropriate to appeal to mystery, quote unquote, and when it's not. Those are the things that we want to look at.
Cool. Alhamdulillah. So let's go to the first question then, anyway, because some of these questions we've actually addressed in other streams, but I do think it's important to lay the foundation so we can understand this. And by the way, for the audience as well, you will have opportunities to come on the show, so we will send out the link later on, inshallah. But in terms of the first question then, Jake, is how do we define this thing called logical contradiction? How do we understand a logical contradiction?
Yeah, so a logical contradiction, in terms of like a formal logical contradiction, is just the affirmation of P and not P, right? Or you can say A and not A. Now, if I were to give some examples of that, that would be like me saying that there exists a married bachelor. Well, that's a contradiction. That's a logical contradiction, because the very meaning of a bachelor is someone who's unmarried. So to say that there's an unmarried married man is a contradiction. It doesn't make any sense because you're affirming A and not A. Likewise, you can say the same thing of things like a square circle, a square triangle, numerous examples like that. I'm just trying to keep it basic so people understand what a logical contradiction is. Obviously, we're going to go into a bit more detail about maybe some examples of what isn't a logical contradiction. But just briefly, I'll mention that. So there may be things that we don't fully understand, right? Like you cannot fully comprehend even how your car works, right? At least I don't anyway, because I'm not very handy. But there's no contradiction because when I get in it, I start it up and it starts moving, even if I don't know and fully comprehend all the ways in which the parts of it are operating and how it's running and how it works, right? So there's no contradiction with that. A contradiction, like I said, again, to repeat, is affirming A and not A, or affirming P and not P, in which case you have two opposites which are being brought together. And I gave some examples like the square circle or married bachelor. So I hope that's clear enough. I don't want to give too many examples to complicate things.
Yeah. So I think the way I look at a logical contradiction as a sort of the bare bones of it is the proposition or the statement or the particular beliefs that are being appealed to do not make they don't carry a meaning, a semantical meaning. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that, Jake, but in terms of, because sometimes I can understand a sentence, but when I try to bring that sentence to something that's meaningful, it doesn't have an actual meaning. Would that be correct to understand it that way?
Yeah, I think like, for example, with married bachelor, you can understand the phrase and you can understand the meaning of both words, right? But you can't understand what that would mean for the two to coexist together, right? What would that look like? It's very, it's very strange. So in that sense, you can understand the words and the meaning of certain words in a what's being expressed as a formal contradiction. And part of the reason why, and this is actually something important, part of the reason why it's a contradiction is because of the fact that you can understand the meaning of the words that are being represented. However, when they're brought together, then yeah, of course, it has no meaning. It's just gobbledygook. It's just like, just talking nonsense. So, but I think that is important because something that's going to come up later, in order to demonstrate that something is actually a contradiction, the two opposites that are being brought together need to be clearly defined and established in order to understand that it's a contradiction, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as for the meaning of the contradiction itself and how they're being brought together simultaneously, no, that's just nonsense.
And so when we talk about, for instance, something's a logical contradiction, when that's made as a claim now, from my understanding, there's a burden of proof now both ways, isn't there? So, for example, when somebody says this particular belief system is a logical contradiction, he has to prove that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, if somebody is saying that, let's say X is a contradiction, then he has to show what the A and not A actually is. Just like I said, a married bachelor is a contradiction. I gave a brief explanation why. So somebody who's claiming that something is a contradiction, especially in a debate or discussion, needs to establish what the A and not A is and demonstrate that the person is actually affirming those two contrary things, rather than just asserting it and straw manning or misrepresenting the person when they're not actually affirming those two opposites.
Yeah. Yahya Patel just put a comment on which I thought it might be a good question to answer. Are logical fallacies considered contradictions?
No, so a fallacy is not necessarily a contradiction. Certainly not. Like you can have, what's an example? Like, I mean, you have formal fallacies and you have informal logical fallacies. And no, they're not necessarily contradictions. Like, for example, an appeal to authority when it's not justified, right? There's no contradiction in it. It's just that you're not justified in appealing to this authority to make a particular argument. There's no contradiction in doing it. You can do this with many different examples. Like I don't know. I don't want to give too many logical fallacies, and then people get confused. But no, logical fallacies have to do with an improper way of reasoning, but it doesn't mean that it is necessarily contradictory.
Yeah. So in essence, I think it's like saying the conclusion is not justified from the syllogism. The syllogism would be
Yes.
like the links between the premises. So you come to a
Yeah.
particular conclusion based upon some sort of premises to an argument, and they don't justify it in that sense. That's probably, and there are probably different forms of logical or different forms of fallacies.
Yeah, I mean, you have like affirming the consequent fallacy, right? So you say something like, well, if P, then Q, Q, therefore P, right? This is a logical fallacy, but the idea that it's not contradictory,
Yeah.
right? It's just an improper inference that's being made. So it should be if P, then Q, P, therefore Q, right? But you can't go from if P, then Q, Q, therefore P. It doesn't work that way. So that's the fallacy of affirming the consequent, because you're affirming the second half of the conditional statement, when in order for it to be a proper inference, you'd have to either affirm P in the second premise, therefore Q, or not Q, therefore not P. So, yeah, but anyway, I don't want to get, like I said, I don't want to get too complicated, but that's a fallacy in reasoning, but it's not a contradiction. Somebody's just making an error or making a mistake in terms of the inference that they're making.
So I think just before you mentioned that point about the question that was given by Yahya Patel, Jazakallah khair for that. But the issue was, the question that I asked specifically is, what is the person under an obligation to demonstrate a logical contradiction? And I think you said yes, they are under. If they're claiming that your belief system is a contradiction, a logical contradiction, they're now obliged to show it. Yeah, it's not the case. Maybe it's just obvious in certain situations, but where it requires a bit of elaboration, they have to show it. And then, if they show it, then the person who is now obligated to respond. Isn't that the case? If somebody turns around and says, okay, your belief is a contradiction, here's the reason why, he spells it out, the person understands what he's saying, he now has to respond to that. Yeah, he can't appeal to mystery in that situation, can he? Well, he could do, but he's just accepting that there's a contradiction that cannot be answered.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we'll go into examples later on, but yeah, if the person is claiming that there's a contradiction, the burden of proof is on him to establish it. Otherwise, he can just say it, and I can say, well, I don't see what the contradiction is. Well, there's going to be a point where he's got to present and demonstrate what the A and not A or the contradiction is. Otherwise, I mean, have a nice day. What can we say? But when he does present it, then obviously if the person is concerned with truth and wants to be consistent, he'll respond by trying to show at minimum how it's not contradictory, even if he doesn't fully understand both concepts involved. So yeah, that's kind of how the dialectic would work. Person who makes a claim of contradiction, burden is on him to demonstrate it, and then the person who is supposedly affirming those two contradictory beliefs, if he's concerned with consistency, he's going to attempt to respond to show how it's not an actual contradiction.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I sort of asked this question and we want to answer it is because when people watch debates and discussions that take place, whether it's between Muslims or Muslims and non-Muslims, or even between non-Muslims themselves, you've got, as an audience, you've got to be armed with some clear understandings about how a proper argument is formulated. Just by claiming something's a contradiction is not sufficient. You have to demonstrate it once you claim it, because you're now under a burden of proof. In the same way, once it's been claimed and demonstrated, then the other person now is under a burden of proof to now demonstrate how their belief system or proposition, whatever it is they hold, doesn't have a burden or doesn't fall under a logical contradiction. He has to give some sort of explanation with regards to this. So, people need to be aware of this, because otherwise discussions go nowhere. And even if people are engaged in these types of discussions, they need to be aware of how to properly engage in a intellectual discourse. Abdulrahman, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah.
How are you guys?
Yeah, good, man. Alhamdulillah. So I don't know how much you listened to the beginning of the show, but obviously you know the topic away, what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, so we just basically asked what is a logical contradiction, and then we talked a bit about that. So the other question that I wanted to ask to lay the foundations of this topic is, does appealing to mystery undermine rational justification for a belief? So maybe you can talk about very briefly, what is it mean? When is it fine to appeal to mystery? And if you do, does that mean that therefore you're not justified rationally holding the beliefs that you hold because there's things that you don't know?
Yeah, well, so I don't think like there's a yes no answer to that question. So it depends in what way you're appealing to mystery. Like, for example, you can say that the mystery you're appealing to might be incomplete information. For example, if you say that there are attributes that God has that we don't know of, that's not the kind of appeal to mystery that would be necessarily problematic, right? If you have an incomplete picture of things where you shouldn't necessarily expect yourself rationally to have a complete picture, that's not really the kind of appeal to mystery that's problematic. But as I think you guys were talking, I was kind of listening. In the case of contradictions, then it's a lot more serious, right? Because if there is an apparent contradiction and you appeal to mystery, then you want to make sure that you're doing that in the right way. So you want to make sure that it is actually an apparent contradiction and that your appeal to mystery is somehow justified. And that's going to come in different forms. So in our everyday language, right, in everyday communication, I can hear somebody say something that appears to be contradictory, right? So I can hear Sharif saying something that appears to be contradictory, but at the same time, I can appeal to mystery in the sense that, well, I know he's not really contradicting himself. He means something else by that. I mean, so that's okay, right? But then when you're specifically talking about something that is at the core of, let's say, a theory that you hold to or a belief system, and something that is central to it, then you really want to avoid that. Then it gets more and more serious. So if if it involves the foundations of your belief or something upon which the truth or falsehood of the belief is going to be assessed or determined, then in this case, really, your appeal to mystery is definitely going to be regarded as a cost for your theory.
Okay, so what about then when we talk about knowing the exact nature of God? Because all theists, or most theists, I would assume, actually, would appeal to some sort of mystery about the true nature of the Creator.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there are plenty of things about God that we don't know, that we don't fully understand. I mean, the list really is quite vast of what we don't know or fully understand about God. But that doesn't mean that God is contradictory any more than there are plenty of things that I don't know about how my car works, right? And not to try to analogize a car with God, but I'm saying even in our common experience, as Abdulrahman was pointing out, there's plenty of things we don't fully grasp we don't even fully understand our own selves, probably. But that doesn't mean that there's some contradiction involved. So God, for example, can we fully comprehend how God can know everything simultaneously with everything that's happening in the world? Well, that's very difficult to imagine, right? But we know the meaning of omniscience. We know what it means for God to be omniscient. It is for him to have knowledge of everything that's going on in the world. But we can't conceptualize it or fully grasp it because we are such limited creatures that we can't really even, we can understand the meaning of it and there's no contradiction with it, but can we grasp it from a first person perspective to understand what it's like? Well, no, certainly not. And no theist, I shouldn't say no, but because I'm sure there are some weird views out there, but the majority of theists will be humble enough to say, very simple, that we don't know God as he knows himself. God has perfect knowledge. He has perfect knowledge of himself and everything in creation. And we don't have perfect knowledge of ourselves or really anything in creation, let alone God, right? So this is a clear difference where we're never going to know God fully as he knows himself. It's just not possible because of the nature of creation and the fact that we're limited, finite creatures. So yeah, there's nothing contradictory about this whatsoever. And it's just a fact of the matter that every theist is going to accept. It's nothing new. It's nothing that's been invented, a year ago or 500 years ago. It's always been this way. And this has always been the Islamic position.
Hey, just something that Abdulrahman said in his answer, which is saying that about if the foundations of a belief you're having to appeal to mystery, then maybe I misunderstood what you said, Abdulrahman. But it sounded like if the foundations of your belief you have to appeal to a mystery, then it's problematic. But then the foundation of a Muslim's belief in God and the nature of God wouldn't be able to fully comprehend.
No, so what I meant there was that if it's something that is required to be understood, if it's something that needs to be intelligible in order for the belief to be rationally assessed, and if the truth or falsity of the belief is going to be based on a specific belief or position or proposition that seems to be internally inconsistent, and you appeal to mystery, well, fine. But then if I want to assess the belief on the basis of what this proposition means, then that's going to be a problem. So like in the case of the Trinity, for example, right? We want to be, we're concerned with as monotheists, we're concerned with the fact that God is one. There's only one creator, right? And we want to know what that means, and we want to know when we're assessing different religions what their concept of God looks like in relation to this, monotheistic background we're coming with. So if at the core of that religion lies a belief that makes unintelligible the facts about God's oneness or lack thereof, then that's going to be a huge cost in terms of my capability of assessing whether or not this is the true religion that must be monotheistic.
Okay, well, look, an atheist might turn around and say, okay, because when an atheist hears the term appeal to mystery, what he's thinking of is you don't have evidence, you don't have justifications, you can't even understand it, and yet you're just saying it's mysterious, and you're appealing to that as a belief system. How could that ever be rationally justified?
Can you mention that last part again, just a couple of seconds?
So I'm just saying in terms of how can you be justified in appealing to mystery? Because a mystery for an atheist, I'm not talking about all atheists, but your typical atheist is like, you don't have reasons, you don't have understanding, you can't comprehend this thing called God, yet you still believe in it. Why would you believe in something that, you don't seem to have any sort of, it's mystery? I mean,
well, what they would mean there, I think what they should mean is like basically like an appeal to ignorance or something, that
Right.
I don't know, therefore X, right? So based on something you're ignorant of, you form a belief. That would be wrong, of course. But if it's an appeal to mystery in the sense that we don't know everything, then that just applies across the board to everybody. So
what about atheists then? Do atheists appeal to mystery? Jake?
I think quite clearly.
yeah, I mean, everybody has to. Really.
Yeah, I think they do, and it would almost be weird for an atheist to really press this issue, because in fact, they, at least in the way that we're using the word mystery, they're very happy with mystery. And in fact, when you try to prod them to give an answer about something, and they constantly want to say, well, I don't know, I'm not sure, we don't have the information for this to really decide and, draw a conclusion on it, yada, yada, yada. They actually see that as something that is of value and something that is virtuous, to actually appeal to mystery when you don't fully understand something, right? Like maybe the nature, especially of the origins of things, the origin of existence, the origin of life, the origin of human species, and so on. I mean, they many times will say, well, we don't have an answer to any of these things, and neither do you. So what? Just kind of like be quiet. And they actually get annoyed when theists will speak about those issues in what they consider to be too much details that they don't think we have the information for, right? So they're probably the last group that should be complaining about appealing to mystery in the sense that we're describing it, in the sense of having a lack of information and not going into further detail, explaining things that we don't have the information for, because they actually see it as, from what I can tell anyway, virtuous thing.
Yeah, I think a good example of that also is consciousness. So
yeah, that's another one. Origin of consciousness.
Everybody believes that we are conscious beings, but what you'll find is that atheists, theists, whoever it is, there's generally an appeal to mystery, i.e. the fact that we don't really understand it. And certainly if you're like an atheist and trying to explain consciousness under a materialistic paradigm, then that is an appeal to mystery. They say they exist, they believe it exists in human beings, but they can't reduce it to the physical. But it doesn't mean that therefore they don't think it is reduced to the physical. So they're still accepting it as in that case. Okay, so let's move on. So let's talk about. So we talked about a bit about the atheists. Let's talk about some Christians as well, because this tends to be sometimes an argument against Muslims in defense of Christianity, which is that both Muslims and Christians both are in the same boat, yeah? As both religious beliefs have some sort of, in their theology, have some sort of appeal or claim to an appeal to mystery. It's just that we have, for the Christians, they have their mystery, and for the Muslims, we have our mystery. How is it that Muslims go and pick out the Christian mysteries while being inconsistent epistemically, according to them?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll get to it a little bit later, but it would be the Christian's duty to try to show what the Muslim mysteries supposedly are. If they're just talking about simple things like we just discussed, like fully comprehending God as he knows himself perfectly, well, let's say for the sake of argument that was a cost, which I don't think it is, and I don't even think Christians consider it a cost, but let's say that it was. Well, in that case, the Christian would have the same cost, and so they would just cancel out, right? So many of the issues in which a Christian is actually going to point to say, well, a Muslim has to appeal to mystery, or the Muslim can't fully understand God in that situation, they have the same thing that they're claiming that we have, right? So it's just going to cancel each other out. But then in terms of costs that they have that we don't, well, I'm certainly going to argue that there are many more, right? And on the reverse, I don't think the Muslim really has very many things that they need to appeal to as a mystery that is unique to Islam rather than unique to Christianity, right? And that's just for the sake of argument. But the first thing they really need to do is they really need to point out what actually the apparent problem is that is unique to Islam that we need to appeal to mystery about. And I don't think that there are very many things that they can actually do with that. So I do see a fundamental difference between Muslim or Islamic theology and Christian theology, in that the things that they typically would appeal to try to say, well, you Muslims have to appeal to mystery because you don't fully understand how God is omniscient or eternal or yada, yada, yada. They have all of those same things, in which they don't find problematic, and even really atheists for the most part don't find those things very problematic, right? So the way in which they're using the word mystery and it's functioning when criticizing Muslims is not really the same as how it's functioning when applied to their own positions.
Yeah, Abdulrahman, can you just expand on this point about costs? Costs, is it cost benefit analysis type of thing, or is this? Could you just sort of explain in an argument, in the ability to evaluate belief systems? Why do we look at costs in this situation?
Yeah, well, as Jake was just saying, right? He's like, if we grant for the sake of argument, right, that our not comprehending the essence of God, the true nature of God, in the same way He knows his own self perfectly. If we're going to, for the sake of argument, assume that that's a contradiction, that's a cost, which it obviously is not, then the question really is, just to sum it up, really, what cost does the Muslim conception of God have that a Christian conception of God wouldn't, right? So you just put the Trinity away, really. There really is no difference. Like, so what cost in terms of basically this topic, an appeal to mystery? What missing information is there going to be that counts as a cost for our theory that wouldn't equally apply to theirs? I honestly can't think of any. So, yeah.
And the costs here are costs in not having the ability to explain a certain thing, because we're limited creatures and we're trying to talk about matters of the unseen. So we're not talking about
assuming for the sake of argument that it's a cost, because their response would only be meaningful if they point back to a cost within the an Islamic formulation of Tawheed, for example, where there is an appeal to mystery that is problematic, that counts as a cost in terms of, like, theory analysis, right?
Yeah.
So, or theory evaluation. So if we assume, for the sake of argument, it's just to simplify the response, right? So let's just assume any appeal to mystery or any kind of mystery is a cost.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a cost, but you're just saying
it doesn't. Yeah. So we're just assuming, for the sake of simplicity, if any kind of mystery is a cost, what mystery does the Muslim conception of God have that wouldn't apply to the Christian conception of God, minus the Trinitarianism? Like, just put the Trinitarianism aside, and really, what would the difference be? I'm not really seeing it.
Okay, cool. So yes, I think that's an important point, is that, what Christians are pointing to in regards to Muslim theology, they also have the same problems, or not the same problems. They also lack in some areas of being able to explain certain things. But what
it's just important to add. It's important to add that clearly there are different, like, formulations of what Christian conception of God would look like, and the same is true on the Muslim side.
Yeah,
we're just saying all things being equal, right? Because you've got different schools here, different schools there, and like, you've got divine simplicity here, you've got divine simplicity there, you've got complexity here, complexity there. You've got different formulations on both sides. So just looking at it more like holistically, obviously it can be more detailed, but just to simplify the answer, I don't see a difference in terms of the cost of mystery if we're going to consider these mysteries costs.
Okay, so let's go into a specific example, which is like the main difference, or the main example. So, in terms of Christianity, or one of the key points that Muslims point to. So Muslims often point to and say, look, this Trinity doesn't make any sense. Yeah. They will turn around and say, look, it makes sense, because you've got one being and three persons. How can there be a contradiction there? And then they'll say, to understand and fully comprehend it is a mystery. You've got one being and multiple attributes. So how could you, claim that there's some sort of logical contradiction? So what would be the burden of proof of the Muslim now when he's talking to a Christian about the Trinity in order to demonstrate that there's a unique issue there, Jake?
Yeah, so it's just like what we said in the beginning. Like if I claim that there's a contradiction inherent in the Trinity, it's my obligation to spell out exactly what that is. And thankfully enough, the Christians themselves have actually spelled it out for us. So we don't even really need to do much work because they've already done it for us. So you have things like in the case of the Trinity, the logical problem of the Trinity, which people have heard me explain many times, which is basically the idea of how you can have one God if you have three individuals, each which are fully God, and they're not each other. So in the case of the Trinity, you have the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, right? But they're not each other, and yet there's only one God. Well, the claim is that if each one of them is individually fully God and they're not each other, well, then you would just count as we normally count 1, 2, 3, and there would be three gods. But yet you're telling us there's only one God. So that's a contradiction because you're saying there's what you actually claim entails that there are three gods, but yet you are actually claiming that there's only one God. So you're simultaneously affirming three gods and one God at the same time. Another sort of logical problem that is related to that is explaining how you can say that the Father is God and the Son is God, and yet they're not each other. Because in order for there to be one God, you're going to want to say that there's an identity relation being made there. So if the Father's God and there's only one God, well, then he's going to have to be identical to God. And if the Son is identical to God, well, then it's just going to follow that the Father and the Son are the same. They're identical to each other. And that's heretical. That's modalism. So you're going to run into, I mean, I can go on in a lot more detail about more so what the problems are, what all of the different options are, where they can go, and why you're going to run into any problem anywhere you go. But the reality is with the doctrine of the Trinity, you're really either going to have incoherence or you're going to have to take a heretical view. That's the reality.
Okay, so I think in essence what you're saying is that we can demonstrate at least as an apparent contradiction, and as soon as we demonstrate an apparent contradiction, they're now under a burden of proof to demonstrate it's not an apparent contradiction. If they claim it's not a contradiction, they can't at that situation now appeal to mystery, because appeal to mystery in that situation would be just saying, well, it is a contradiction, we just don't have a way of explaining it. Yeah. So, and in that situation, when you're trying to assess belief systems, now you got one belief system that doesn't seem to have any of these types of logical contradictions, and another belief system that has these apparent logical contradictions. Both may appeal to a mystery in some aspects of their theology, but one is appealing to a mystery when it comes to being able to explain and demonstrate that their belief is not a contradiction. Yeah, and that's a key difference between that. So now I want to go into the question specifically. Right, one second, because because what they're going to point out, they're going to turn around and say, or some people might turn around and say, is that they may turn around and say, okay, but you guys also believe in a logical contradiction, or they try to claim it's a logical, or they kind of claim it's some sort of mystery or whatever it is, or contradiction. When it comes to the Quran, they say the Quran is a speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that, it's not created, it comes down to us. So we have this attribute, this divine attribute that manifests in a created realm. Yeah. So I don't know if anybody wants to take that question.
Yeah. So part of the issue is
So the
that
reason why,
many.
Jake, I was going to say the reason why I've not really elaborated upon the question too much is because Christians don't actually elaborate upon what
Well,
the
that's the
problem
point.
is.
That's exactly what I was gonna just say right now.
Yeah.
So, like me, I can point out systematically exactly what the contradiction is with the Trinity, right? Like I can put it in 7 premises, show you how those 7 premises form an inconsistent set. I can show you that Christian scholars themselves admit this. They write about the logical problem, the Trinity. They try to respond to these problems, etc. We don't have anything like that in our literature. We don't have anything like that even from the literature of people critiquing our views, showing how the belief that the Quran is the speech or the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't have anything from that showing precisely exactly how it's a contradiction, right? So part of the problem is to try to reconstruct or construct what we think they're trying to say, where the contradiction or problem actually is, and do the work for them, right? But that's almost giving them too much credit. Really, if that's what they want to do, whether it be Christian or atheist, whoever, they should explain to us exactly in clear formal logic exactly what the contradiction is. Otherwise, there is nothing. Maybe it's something you don't understand or something seems strange or whatever. But as far as I know, there is no contradiction. I don't know anything called the logical problem of the speech of Allah and where it's being written about classically and today. I don't see anything like that, right? So people need to, if they want to, going back to what we originally said, Sharif, is if they're the one making the claim, they need to very clearly establish what the A and not A contradiction is. As far as I know, there isn't with the Quran being a speech of Allah. Now, I mean, we can elaborate on what that means and the different positions that have been given in the tradition, the one that I may take and the ones that I would argue against or disagree with. We can do all of that. But I would say really none of those positions are inherently contradictory. You could disagree with them theologically, but they're not necessarily contradictory.
Okay,
so,
let me ask then, Jake. Do any of the positions within the Islamic schools believe that the actual Quran that we physically hold and physically recite is an incarnation of the divine?
No, nobody believes that.
Yeah. So just on that basis, then there's no.
Let me
go on. So Abdulrahman, go on.
Let me just add to what Jake was saying. It seems like by doing this, what our Christian friends would be doing is that they'd be just adding logical problems of fill in the blank on their side too, because so you see, it's not like God doesn't have speech and God doesn't send revelation within the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? Well, what's God's speech in their? Is it created? Is it uncreated? You're gonna have the same discussion. So if you're looking at the attributes of God again, so that's what I meant earlier when I said, well, let's look at the Christian conception of God, at a Muslim conception of God, and tell me what kind of appeal to mystery or logical problem there would be that wouldn't also apply to the Christian conception of God, just minus the Trinity.
I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to say fire on all your houses, or plague on all houses, effectively saying, yeah, we've got the problem, but everybody's got a problem. Yeah, you've got a problem, I've got a problem, we all got a problem. So how
I don't
dare
think that's
you?
what they're saying, because I don't think there's nothing in their literature called the logical problem of God's speech, God's word.
Right.
I mean, they don't acknowledge that as a genuine problem.
Okay, yeah,
And,
I understand. Yeah.
So it's really whatever they throw back at the Muslim. I just want to know how that couldn't equally be applied to Christianity as well. God has these attributes and sends revelation and has speech and all that stuff within the Christian tradition. Hamad Hanif, wa alaikum salam. How you doing, bro?
So yeah, so So I think that's a really important point, because let me just sort of emphasize for the audience. What you're saying is that Christians also have this idea that God speaks, but they don't have, like Jake has mentioned before, their own literature that talks about this as being a logical contradiction that needs solving. So now when they're talking about the Muslims, and they misrepresent, one, they don't present the argument as to why it's a logical contradiction and therefore equivalent to the logical problem of the Trinity. Secondly, is that they try to claim something that Muslims don't believe. So Muslims don't believe that the Quran, in the various schools of thought on this particular issue, that the Quran is literally an incarnation of God or the divine into the physical realm. And also the final point, which is to say, well, they don't even see it as a problem in their own literature anyway. So, why would they be raising it against the Muslims in that sense? But okay, there's another thing that they'll raise, that they may raise, which is the claims of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like mercy or justice of God. They'll say, look, we can't know this precisely, and if we don't, isn't this an appeal to mystery? And we can thus say anything about them can we thus say anything about them in a meaningful way? Can we really talk about the mercy of God if we can't really understand its true reality? Yeah. Does that make sense? The question. So we're saying we don't know the attributes of God fully.
Yeah.
How can we, if we can't understand the attributes of God fully, how can we even talk about them in any meaningful way? If we can't talk about them in any meaningful way, then you guys are in this mystery way. Like we're talking about the persons of God. That's a mystery as well.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about knowledge, right? And I think people should sort of keep this principle in mind, that pretty much anything that you can say about God when it comes to a particular attribute or his essence, you should be able to say it about another attribute, right? So just as I can't fully comprehend or understand God's knowledge, likewise, I can't fully comprehend or understand God's mercy or justice. There's no contradiction inherent within that. So again, I mean, it sounds like we're being a bit defensive, but we're actually not. We're saying, come on, present what exactly the contradiction is. Give us the clear example of A and not A. And we've actually done this on streams before, on things related to God and his goodness and evil in the world and things like that, right? Because it's almost like saying, well, I don't know why God allowed such and such to occur, therefore there's a contradiction. Well, no, there's no contradiction. I just don't know why that he willed that event or why that he allowed that event to occur. That there's nothing contradictory about that. It's just I don't have the full information in order to make an assessment on why something happened or why God willed a particular thing. But there's nothing contradictory about that. And that's going to apply for things like God's mercy and justice. So again, I think we just back to square one, that we don't really have a clear example of a contradiction.
Okay, what about in terms of the fact that people turn around and say, okay, but any explanation of God's mercy or justice or wrath would be in sort of human terms? Wouldn't that make it some sort of limited in some sort of way? That you're trying to understand the attributes of God. These are meant to be meaningful to us when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman or Ar-Rahim. But then to make it meaningful, that would mean that it would have to have some sort of meaning that we can correspond with. And if we're corresponding to it, we think in limited context. So therefore, wouldn't that mean that, we're contradicting the nature of God, who's not limited, but would be unlimited? We're making Teshbih, basically. We're making similarity between God's attributes and creation.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if you want to respond to that, Abdulrahman, or do you want me to?
Quick recap, Sharif, just because I heard you, but I was kind of like.
In terms of saying, for example, that this may be moving away from Christians now, but maybe somebody might turn around and say, look, you're saying that God is merciful. the idea of God being merciful you would have to have a comprehension of mercy in your mind. As a human being, the only thing that we know of mercy would be limited things that creatures do. And so therefore, to correspond that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wouldn't that therefore mean that we are limiting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by using these types of adjectives like mercy, wrath, or justice or wisdom?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, that wouldn't really have anything to do with mystery, right? Because it would actually be the opposite, right? So it would be like if the charge is that there is tashbih, then it's not really a mystery. It's like you're saying something about God that you know of creation. So I don't think that would be a charge of like an appeal to mystery. But again, I mean, just the claim in itself is strange. It's what they're trying to say is because God is dissimilar to creation and He is far above, having any like the deficiencies of creation and stuff like that, then we couldn't say anything about Him because all of our knowledge is based in experience. And that's just a whole other discussion on its own, because we talk about things that are not within our experience all the time, and we have the capability to do that. And there are many examples that can be discussed with regard to that. And long story short, in predicating something of God, right, that has a certain aspect that is applicable to creation, like the word would be applicable also to creation, does not mean that there's some sense of tashbih. And tashbih will be a whole discussion on its own, as in how every school sees tashbih. So again, this is, as you said, it's moving away from Christianity, but I don't think really anybody, regardless of their worldview, could consistently make the claim that we can't use words that we've developed from within our experience to talk about things that are not in our experience and things that are actually very dissimilar to our experience. That I think that would be problematic on many levels.
Yeah, I think the issue is that when we talk about God's mercy and we talk about human mercy, we're not talking about them in an identical sense. I think that's the key issue. Jake, I don't know if you wanted to add any points to what Abdulrahman said in terms of that specific question.
Not really, other than just going off of what you last said. Yeah, we don't mean it in an identical sense. Like God's knowledge is not the same thing as Jake's knowledge. There's obviously clear differences that we can speak about between them. But even besides the differences that we know of, there are certain things about the specific attributes that we don't know of, that we know there's a difference, but we can't even say much more as to what some of those differences are that we're not aware of. But yeah, I don't really see any problem in that whatsoever, because we're going to use language that we are familiar with and that is given to us in the revelation itself, and apply it to God as He's done it for Himself. He says that He's knowledgeable, that He has power, that He has will, that He has life, ability, etc., etc. And so there's no harm in using those terms, so long as we understand and we don't anthropomorphize God, which we're going to get to in a second, in the sense that we try to make or liken Him like creation, as if He's some type of human being or anything similar to that. No, certainly not. But we are within our rights to use the language that the Quran and the Sunnah, in our case, in our tradition, has given us, in which God speaks about Himself in that way, so long as we understand the correct parameters of everything that we just discussed, that there are clear differences between God's knowledge and our knowledge, and all of the other attributes that are mentioned, right? There was a comment here from Free Naturalist. He said, if we can't fully understand the knowledge of the necessary being, wouldn't that also mean we can't fully understand God's capabilities? I'm not sure what he means by God's capabilities. Because typically when you say what is God capable or able to do, we're just going to understand that as something like God's power, meaning that he can do anything logically or if you want metaphysically possible. But I'm not sure what you mean by his capabilities.
I think you might have responded. So how then would you know if God or not God can limit himself to a finite existence? Okay, that's a good, yeah. It's a typical question.
Okay, I mean, well, yeah, that's basically saying something like, well, is it possible for God to become a man, or for something like the incarnation to be true? And we know that that's not the case because it's a contradiction. And if you want to say that God is quote unquote limited by contradictions, sure, you can say that, but we don't use that terminology because we don't believe that contradictions are actually things that God can or cannot do. It's like saying, well, can God be a rock, or can God create another God? Well, no, it can't, because God himself cannot be finite or limited in the sense of becoming creation or becoming a man and being, all knowing and at the same time ignorant. That's a contradiction. To say that a single being at the same time is both, eternal and created. He is both omniscient and ignorant. He's both all powerful and lacks power. That's why God cannot become a man or limit himself in that way, because it results in affirming a contradiction, which at the outset we said we're not, in the business of doing.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the beginning of the stream where we talked about how what a logical contradiction is really some sort of propositional belief or some sort of belief that although the sentence might make sense, I might understand the individual component words, the actual sentence in a grammatical sense is meaningless. Yeah, the semantics of the sentence is meaningless. There's no meaning you can grab from that sentence. So like you said, marriage bachelor, or a four-sided triangle, or a squared circle on a flat plane, whatever it is. Yeah, those words that you're bringing together, I understand each individual component word, but as soon as I bring it together, I don't have a meaningful sentence. Yeah, so when we're saying can God do X, what X has to be something that's meaningful. That's why when people say God is all powerful, has capabilities, what we're saying is God is capable of do all logical things, or as some may say, all metaphysically possible things. Yeah. So therefore, anything that is not considered logically possible, logically impossible, is not a thing that can be even conceived of. Yeah, it's meaningless. It's gibberish. Yeah, it's just literally stringing words together in an incoherent sentence and saying, "Can God do that?" And you're like, "Well, what does that mean?" And you're like, "I don't know." Yeah, so it's just a meaningless point. Yeah, so I think people need to understand, and think maybe it's an argument that a lot of atheists bring up about they call it the omnipotence paradox, and it's just they don't understand some of the basic points basically. So anyway, it's a good question though. Jazakallah khair for asking that question.
Yeah, somebody asked in the chat. Jake is wearing green, so logical contradictions may be possible. so yeah, that's an example of something that is unlikely on the tap streams, but is certainly not a logical contradiction, right? So that's actually a good example to show.
We thought it was
difficult
a
to understand why I'm. Yeah, it might be difficult to understand why I'm wearing green, right? Considering I always usually wear red. But there's nothing contradictory about it. It might just be a little strange.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go to questions, and we're gonna send the link out so people can join the link, inshallah. So don't worry, guys. But there's one final question that I wanted to ask, which is related to the one above that we've talked about, and this is really to do with what about, because again, people might bring this up. What about the terms like the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the yad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and other such attributes that some claim sort of present an anthropomorphic picture of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? isn't claiming that we don't know its howness or total meaning akin to appealing to mystery and like Christians who affirm a logical contradiction? I hope that's clear to the audience, that question.
Yeah, I think it's clear. Yeah, I don't think it. I don't think it is a logical contradiction. I don't think it's affirmed to, akin to Christians affirming a logical contradiction like the Trinity or the incarnation that we just brought up, only because somebody asked a question that seemed like it was related to it. So again, I mean, it's kind of like a broken record here, where I'm just going to say, well, the burden of proof is on the person who wants to claim that it is a logical contradiction to show that it's actually a contradiction, and then we can respond to it. I can try to construct a couple ways in which someone might claim that it's a contradiction. So you might say something like, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, he's not like his creation in the sense that he can't be ascribed with these quote unquote anthropomorphic, seemingly human-like qualities of a hand or a face or anything like that. And so on the one hand, you're saying that he's not like his creation. And on the other hand, you're basically affirming that he has human body parts, right? Which obviously I'm not, but I'm trying to explain how maybe they might see the contradiction. Well, I'm just going to deny that when I affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a yad or yad Allah, that this is anything like a human hand or a human body part or anything like that, right? So the contradiction isn't even going to get off the ground in this case, because it's based on an A or not A that I'm not affirming, right? So I'm affirming yad Allah, but I'm not, and I'm affirming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like his creation. He doesn't have human body parts or human qualities. But on the other hand, it's being said that I am affirming that, but I'm denying that, right? So that apparent contradiction is removed because it's based on a straw man or a misrepresentation of what it means when I'm affirming something like the hand or yad of Allah, right? But then somebody could say something else, right? Well, they can say something like, well, yad Allah or hand in this case, Jake, you're affirming it on its apparent meaning, and the apparent meaning is something like a human hand, right? And at the same time, you're denying it. So what you're affirming for Allah actually should entail this, but then you're denying it. So that's a contradiction, because on the one hand, you're affirming it and it must mean X, and on the other hand, you're denying X, even though you actually are accepting it. So now you're left with another contradiction. And I'm just going to say the same thing, that when I affirm yad Allah, or when I affirm Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a hand, right? I'm not affirming that means what you're claiming that it means, and therefore it doesn't have all these entailments of it being like such and such, and it looking like a human something in creation or anything like that, right? So again, it's going to be claims of contradiction which are based on a misunderstanding of what I'm actually affirming when I say that I affirm yad Allah. And part of the problem with this is that it goes into a very intricate and sort of long discussion about different theories of language and what theory of language I'm holding to when I affirm such and such idea, and so many other complicated issues that maybe eventually we'll do a whole stream on, talking about different theories of language and what theory of language we're holding to when we affirm such things like this, and why it doesn't result in a contradiction because of that. Maybe we can go into it a little bit here, but I think that really needs an entire stream to go into a lot more detail onto some of those points.
Abdulrahman, I don't know if you want to respond as well.
Yeah, I have a feeling that like some of the people who come up with these like weird arguments just don't really. There's a lot they're missing in terms of how you show that something's a contradiction. Like if I were to speak to a polytheist, let's say somebody believes in, I don't know, 7 gods or something, right? And if I tell him that, hey, your belief is inconsistent and there's a contradiction you're holding to, because, well, God is in fact one. There's one God. So now you're saying God is both, like, 7 and not 7, or 1 and not 1. I mean, that would be a very problematic way of arguing for it. I mean, his belief is false. It's wrong because there is only one God. But if I come up to him and tell him that you believe in a contradiction because you believe that there are 7 gods, but in fact there is only one God, so it can't be both one and not one at the same time in the same way. It's a very strange way of arguing because he doesn't hold to these 2 propositions, so he's just wrong. Or if somebody believes that water is not H2O, right? Tell them you believe in the contradiction because water is H2O and it can't be both H2O and not H2O. That's a very strange way of arguing. You have to just show that he's wrong. Similarly, people who talk about certain attributes that from their perspective couldn't be affirmed of God, saying that it's a contradiction, it's going to come in many forms. But I mean, this one's a bit strange that, if you say because God is transcendent and you have a specific understanding of transcendent, or because God is perfect and necessary and you have a specific understanding of that I don't share, and you say that it conflicts with that, well, you're not really arguing by contradiction here. That's not what you're doing. That fact that it or that belief that it contradicts needs to be something that's shared between us for you to do that. And something else, this whole idea that it's a hand but it's not a hand is exactly the same thing, because you see, you have a specific understanding of what hand is based on whatever theory of meaning you hold to. It's a deep discussion, but you have that understanding, and you're saying that, well, you can't say that it's a hand, but it's not this, because if you do, you're saying it's both this and not this. But that's your understanding of what it is, and you're just skipping over a whole lot of philosophy that's necessary in order to try to get a basic understanding of the position you're supposedly critiquing. So yeah, this is a very strange way to look at contradictions, to be honest. And
just for the audience as well,
we've seen worse, I think. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm just saying, just for the audience. Yeah, I pinned the link in the chat, so anybody who wants to join. Primarily, we want to focus on this topic here, which is about appeal to mystery equals appeal to contradiction. So, this claim that Muslims are epistemically inconsistent when they come to criticize other beliefs, while at the same time having certain aspects of their beliefs where they're appealing to some sort of mystery. Yeah. So, we want people to, if you have contentions or whatever it is, please, come forward. Yeah. But going back to this particular question while we wait for people to join us. So I think the issue when we talk about appealing to this is a big topic, and I think maybe we have to address this topic in a number, maybe on its own. Yeah. But what different groups within the Islamic paradigm look at this is they're saying, does the word indicate something in a particular meaning that has to be taken in its literal sense, which would contradict other aspects within the Quran or the Sunnah, or even some of the rational arguments for the existence of God? Is there an internal contradiction in that sense? Now, some scholars might look at the wording, and this is what Jake said, and say, based upon their theory of language, say it implicates this particular literal meaning, which would contradict the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like creation. Therefore, it diverts it to a metaphorical meaning. And the metaphor is accepted among some scholars, or a lot of scholars, that, you know, certain words, certain attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be used in a metaphorical sense. Yeah. I think you mentioned Abdulrahman about how Ibn Uthaymeen, he said that some of these terms that people point to and say is potentially anthropomorphic, that there's ikhtilaf over whether it can be used in a metaphorical way anyway. But the thing is that whether there's a necessity to indicate to move from a literal to a metaphor. Yeah. And maybe it's a bit, I was a bit wordy. I'm trying to, but let me give it a bit. It's like, for example, in the Quran, it talks about Maryam alayhi salam, Mary, how when she's informed about the birth of Jesus, that she's pregnant. Sorry, that she's going to give birth to Jesus, that she's pregnant. She said, "But no man has touched me." Yeah, the literal word "touch" here, yeah, can be understood or is understood as to mean physical touch with intention. There are some other interpretations of the word touch as well, like touch with desire, etc. Yeah, but it can mean physical touch. Now, the Hanafi scholars, they use this evidence to say that when it says that if you touch a woman, you break your wudu, they don't mean touch in its literal sense, but they mean it in a metaphorical sense, because they're saying that this word here cannot be applied in its literal sense with Maryam alayhi salam, so it indicates something else, that she's been with a man, etc. Yeah, through any intimate relations. So it indicates that. So you divert it from its literal to its metaphor. So you do that if you cannot apply its literal meaning. Now the issue here is this: is what is the literal meaning, and does it indicate something which would result in a logical contradiction or something incompatible with the belief of Islam? Some scholars say no, it doesn't. But what they do is they avoid affirming any aspect with his tashbih. The only accusation that can be made is to say no, but it has that indication. It's the entailment of that. But then they have to prove that it's an entailment, and they can't prove it if you don't accept some of the parameters of how they use language. Is that correct? Of how
just a minor clarification on I think it was Ibn Uthaymeen, either him or Ibn Baz, maybe. But the point wasn't that it's correct, because clearly he doesn't see that as correct to do.
He sees the literal as correct, but he sees the literal not having to move from being the literal to the metaphor, because he doesn't see it as indicating something that's similar to creation. That's true, isn't it?
So what I remember from what he said was that so for example, he compare it to another Islamic view. He would be that, like, so basically it's not kufr, as in it's not you playing around with the words of Allah, making things up when you interpret it as power, because the language can like handle that. It's within the scope of the language. And it does come in that form sometimes, although he disagrees that that's what's meant by it.
Yeah,
as opposed to somebody who just have some weird, funky interpretation of the Quran, and we know those. That's a different story. Like, if you interpret.
So Jake, so this sounds to me similar to the discussion about the discussion around about the attributes of mercy, where we would probably say this is an analogical predication, not univocal. Yeah, meaning it's not identical. So when we say the mercy of Allah and the mercy of human beings, we're not saying that they're identical, but there's some similarity, or something that we can correspond. So when we say the hand of Allah, we're not saying it in a univocal way. Are we even saying it analogical? Could we say it could be equivocal, like the hand of, as an example?
No, I think it's analogical. But I want to give an example. So like, so take something like knowledge, which most Muslims are going to agree on, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has knowledge. Well, it seems like everything that we're familiar with in creation that we apply knowledge to, right, is usually humans. And well, so that means in order to have knowledge, you must have a physical brain. So therefore, if we're applying knowledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, astaghfirullah, he must have a brain. Well, of course, nobody believes that, right? So the basic idea and the basic claim that simply using a certain word in this manner and applying it to something in creation and then also applying it to Allah, that necessarily then is going to entail that aspect in which that thing in creation has, in this case, knowledge. Well, it's always associated with brain. So if Allah has knowledge, and he has to have a brain. And some atheists will actually use such arguments, right?
Aaron
And
Ra.
typically theists will laugh it off like, come on, dude, that's just stupid, right? But then in this case, some theists will forget that and not want to apply that consistently to our affirmation of other attributes like Yadullah. Well, no,
Yeah.
we don't think it's like this, and must be this particular shape, and it looks like this, and all these kind of claims that it's flesh and bones and body. No, we don't claim any of that, right? Just as we wouldn't to say that just because Allah has knowledge that he has a brain. Astaghfirullah. We wouldn't say anything like that. So yeah, this is something to keep in mind, and also, like I said, we really have to do a whole kind of sort of stream on it, because there's a lot of things in play, not just to do with theory of language, but also ontology, things like realist ontology, or this concept of real universals that are instantiated in each particular instance of things, versus an anti-realist approach to it and saying, well, no, there aren't these universals that actually exist in the particular. That's all related to this topic, and it's related to our affirmation of these attributes and language. All of this is connected, right?
Yeah.
But so what I'm saying is, if a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim who may disagree with some of my approaches to some of these attributes, if they actually want to really be robust and provide a proper criticism, they should take in all of these things into consideration. Don't straw man or misrepresent. Actually take into the theory of language being applied, the theory of ontology that's being used, the way in which these attributes are being affirmed, and how that's connected to the greater theory or the greater sort of theology that is being employed, and actually try to represent it accurately, and then say what you think is wrong. Say, well, okay, I think that theory of language is actually incorrect, or I think that the meaning of the word is something other than what you're saying, or I think that realism is true and anti-realism about universals is false, and it results in this problem. You can do all of those sort of things, but you have to take the whole package together and then try to say, well, this is the problem, or this is the contradiction. And I just haven't seen anyone do it. Most of the time, it's based on purposeful misrepresentations, or genuine ignorance on the person's part. You have to do a lot more studying than that. For example, like with the LPT, or when I criticize the Christian positions, I read their sources. I don't read sources from Muslims contradicting the Trinity. I read Christian Trinitarian sources. I try to give them their fair shake of them explaining what the problem is. Then I read all attempted solutions to the problem, and what this person said and what that person said, and then I try to engage in it. This is if that's how you should be if you're serious and you want to critique somebody's position instead of misrepresenting them or giving sort of cheap arguments. That's the way in which it should be done, and I haven't seen anyone do it with this sort of ethity affirmationist position on these attributes. I mean, I've got plenty of Christian books here. Like, for example, I can make the claim about the LPT because I have a book here from James Anderson and called Paradox in Christian Theology, in which at the end of discussing the Trinity, he says this: as the debate stands today, no writer from the first century to the 21st century has offered an explication of the doctrine of the Trinity that is both clearly orthodox and free from apparent contradiction. It seems that the careful theologian inevitably faces a dilemma, that of embracing either paradox
or heterodoxy, meaning basically heresy, right? So this is a statement from a Christian theologian today who is saying after 2,000 years, and he does a survey, he explains what the problem is, explains the various attempted solutions to the problem, and his conclusion is, look, guys, there is no answer to it. It looks like a contradiction. Now, he doesn't affirm that it actually is one, and he tries to justify it later on. But I'm just bringing this up to say, I don't see Christians or atheists or even other Muslim groups who are contradicting certain positions or criticizing certain positions that I or maybe Abdulrahman or others may hold with the same sort of rigor of actually going into the text, trying to understand what people are saying, represent them accurately, and then provide a criticism. There's just not that level of criticism and rigor that's being done from the other side.
Yeah, there's a good book by Imam Ghazali who talks about the reason why he wrote the book was because there was he's obviously Ashari himself, and there was an Ashari scholar who was being quite vociferous against the Hanbalis of his time, and basically saying that they have committed kufr, they're out of the folds of Islam, they've anthropomorphized Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he wrote the book Al-Faisal Tafrika, which is the shortened version of the full title. I think Sherman Jackson has it translated, really good book. So he explains about where a language is indicated and how you move, and why the Atharis or the Hanbalis don't move from literal to metaphorical. It's not because they're affirming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like creation, but rather they don't see that there is wording, an indicator to indicate that that's the only meaning that you can take from it in its apparent meaning. Yeah. So, but I think we need to we need to go to some of our guests. So inshallah, we're going to bring them on. Just before I go to some of our
one second, please. Just
sorry.
You can bring the guest on while we're doing this.
Go on then.
But I want you to bring up Muhammad Hanif's comment up, our friend Muhammad Hanif, because he's really the only one in the comments from because he's really the only one in the comments from like the opposing position. And by opposing, I mean like he probably agrees with us on a lot of what we're saying, but I mean about this point about the attributes, he's probably the only one from those opposing in the comments that's not being a clown about it. So this is a comment by Hanif, and I had a good discussion with him yesterday, and we sort of came to a good common ground. But here, so this is a good indicator of how certain misunderstandings happen. So he's saying the apparent meaning is a physical organ of grasping, manipulation, and pointing. Now this is denied by everybody. So nobody says that. So if that's what the apparent meaning is,
so Abdulrahman, just really quickly, it's a really important point. If the meaning of the word indicated this and only this as a meaning, yeah, in its literal sense, then no scholar would adopt it.
Nobody would adopt it.
Yeah,
nobody.
Right.
Yeah, nobody says that the God's hand is a physical organ of grasping manipulation.
So
if that's what the apparent meaning is, I mean, that's not affirmed. And then his second point is you can't say what the apparent meaning is if it's not the physical thing. Well, fine, because the apparent meaning for you has to be that physical thing. It has to be what is observed. Okay. Now, what is using a word that doesn't indicate the apparent meaning for Hanif would be metaphor. So, for example, I asked him a question yesterday about, the wings of angels. Does he see the wing of an angel as something that is literal? Because his definition of a wing was something that's, he gave a proper definition, right? A feathered organ, something, Hanif with his English. And he said that if it's not that, which of course the wing of the angel is not, then it's metaphor, and it's meant as something that's similar to a literal wing in terms of something like its functions, that in terms of its entailments or whatever, right? There's some notion of similarity, but it's not literal. And then we agreed. We came to an agreement. I told him, okay, well, but what you're using for metaphor here is just really what the Salafi or the Taymi Athari means by literal meaning applying to both of those. So the dispute here, just take note of what the dispute here with Hanif is, and we agreed on this yesterday. The dispute is not really about the sifa or about tashbih. The dispute is what to call the literal meaning and what not to call the literal meaning. Right? It's not about whether it's a physical organ or not. Nobody disagrees on that. And we came to an agreement yesterday that, okay, so this position, this affirmationist Taymi Salafi position is not tashbih. And Muhammad Hanif agreed with that because it couldn't be if you're saying that second part, that metaphorical part, which is for him is metaphor, right? And then his other problem with it would be, the problem of composition, which is a different story, right? But then tashbih goes out the window, right? So
basically what you're saying is that it's a semantic problem with the word apparent. Whereas some people would say it's better to use the word metaphor as opposed to apparent. So, yeah, okay, that's fine. I want to move on because I know we've got guests, and I just want to quickly read this out. So we've got a super chat. Can you do a discussion with an atheist who atheists have a burden of proof? Maybe Aaron Ra. I don't think Aaron Ra wants to come on, but inshallah,
I don't know if he saw that. I don't know if Android phone saw that, but we already had Aaron Ra on our platform.
Yeah, we had that. That's right. Yeah.
So I mean, people can go watch it, but I don't think he'd come back on.
We've also got Layman, Jazakallah super chat. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. If you affirm true contradictions exist like the incarnation, what would absolute truth mean then? And then he says, Abdul, where's your coffee?
This is Layman. He's our biggest fan, ever since the.
I think it's more a rhetorical point. I think he's just saying it's a rhetorical point. If you're affirming true contradictions, then what does truth mean? So I think there's a problem with that. But I want to move on quickly now to Ayman, who came in. Sorry, apologies for you waiting for so long. Salam, brother.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah, guys, for having me on. I'm looking forward to that podcast that maybe you guys can have in the future, where you can go into the details of what you hinted on here today. But I was just thinking about this from a Muslim Christian perspective, where how we say when you say that Jesus, God, became man, and that, but we won't go into the details of what that is. That seemed similar to how we're not saying Yad means this or it doesn't mean this. We just don't know. It kind of seemed like that, where we're saying we're not affirming or denying. Well, we're not even saying what we're affirming or denying, just like they wouldn't affirm or deny their position.
But how are they similar? I mean, but they would have to say that Jesus is man, fully man. They actually say it quite literally, straightforwardly. So they don't mean it in some analogical sense. So I don't see, even if we're going to grant your point for the sake of argument about it not having a meaning and just not knowing what we're saying, really, it's still not the same, because for them they quite clearly know what they're saying when they say God is man, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, at most, at best, I think what somebody could try to say is, well, you guys are appealing to mystery because you're using words and you don't actually know the meaning, right? But we kind of went over that, but we could reiterate that again. But what you can't do is you can't say, well, you're affirming a contradiction like Jesus being fully God and fully man at the same time, because we're certainly not saying anything close to that. So they're entirely different things. The problem with the Christian position on the incarnation and the Trinity does not come about, and this is something important that people need to take note of. The contradiction does not arise from what is not known. The contradiction arises from what they affirm, and then they say, we don't know how to resolve this contradiction, which is based on what I just read out from James Anderson. They affirm two contradictory things. Jesus is both fully God and fully man at the same time. He knows everything and is ignorant at the same time. They're literally affirming that, and then somebody says, well, that's a contradiction, and then they say, well, it's a mystery. We're not doing that. At best, you can say that we're saying that we're affirming something without knowing the meaning, but I don't even think we're doing that. But do you see the difference between those two things?
Yeah, that makes sense. If about something like Yadullah, are we saying, or are we explicitly denying the very literal meaning of an organed hand with bones and stuff?
Yes.
So we're saying it definitely doesn't mean that.
Yeah, we are. For example, Imam al-Tabari, I'll just read a quick quote from him. Right? He says, and this is in his tafsir, you can read it. He says, we affirm all of those meanings that were mentioned in the scriptural reports of the book and the revelation, as understood through literal affirmation. So he says through literal affirmation, but then see what he means by this. And we deny assimilation. So we say that he, exalted is his praise, hears the sounds, not with an opening in the ear, and not with an organ like the children of Adam. Likewise, he sees objects with a vision that is unlike the vision of the children of Adam, which is by their organs. He has two hands. And then he goes on to say, and these are not appendages, right? But his hands are outstretched with his favors upon his creatures. And then he goes on to say further, these are not made of flesh or blood. So he affirms them and says it's a literal affirmation. So notice two things. And this is to show that this is not just some theory of language that was adopted later on. In Imam al-Tabari's mind, he's saying we're affirming it on the literal meaning, but then at the same time denying appendages and flesh and blood and bones and all of that. Right? So it's very clear. Everyone denies, whether you say it's a literal meaning or you affirm it, but you say that it's not literal. Nobody is saying that it is anything like a flesh and blood and bones and anything like creation.
Okay. Jazakallah, guys. Appreciate it.
Welcome. Any final questions, or has that been all sorted for you, Ayman?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I'm just looking
Let me just
forward
add
to
a final point, Ayman.
Yeah.
There's a very important distinction, and you'll hear it in the beginning of the stream as well, between and I think Jake mentioned this, right? An appeal to mystery in the sense that there is something that you don't know the meaning of, right? Or incomplete information versus what seems to be a contradiction that you're appealing to mystery for the sake of getting out of, right? And also the point about tashbih as well. Like, forget about contradictions and mysteries, right? So the point about, God having a hand in a way that people picture in this way, like a physical way, and then they talk about tashbih, and relating that to what you said about God being, incarnating into man for Christians. Just that point alone, I mean, they affirm, yeah, it's man, like just as you would think a normal man is.
Right.
They're explicitly saying that it must be a man like that. It's not that it's a man in some ununderstood way. If those who accuse the Taimian position of being unintelligible, or in a way that's analogous. No, it's man. He must be fully man. So there's really no comparison.
Right. Jazakallah, Abdulrahman.
Jazakallah. Sorry. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, brother Muhammad. Isam. Muhammad Assam. You there, bro?
I can't hear anything from him.
Neither can I.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Bit quiet though.
Okay, let me see if I can turn it up. Just 1 second.
That's a bit better, yeah.
Is it better?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, it's better, yeah.
Perfect. Assalamu alaikum. How are you guys?
Walaikum salam, alhamdulillah. Good, man, good.
Good, alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah for waiting. What's your comment or question?
No problem. Well, thank you for having me on. So I've been listening to what you guys were saying regarding the sifat and the yad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I do affirm the Salafi position. Like I don't, I would take, I would accept certain metaphors in terms of the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but generally speaking, like the shin of Allah or the hand of Allah, I do affirm them not in a tashbihi way, but in a literal sense. But I guess the problem for me arises when I actually begin to think about it philosophically. So Brother Abdulrahman, you mentioned an example earlier about comparing angels, like the wings of angels and the wings of creatures that we know. And I just find that a little bit of a problematic example, because at the end of the day, an angel is not a transcendent entity like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you could still say that it does have a physical wing, but the wing is not similar to the wings of the creatures that we are familiar with. And likewise, a lot of people cite examples like, okay, does Allah have a life? Yes. Do you have a life? Yes. Are they similar? No. But that's also problematic, because at the end of the day, life and consciousness is a metaphysical concept. But when we start speaking of things like a hand or a shin, they have literal physical meanings, and we have no other conception of understanding those ideas. So it appears to be a contradiction to me to say that I affirm that Allah has a hand, but it's not like our hand, because that is a contradiction. That is to say, Allah has a physical attribute or physical object or whatever you want to call it, but he does not at the same time. Do you understand my sentiment?
I mean, yeah, if you said that, it would be a contradiction based on what you just said. So you're saying that hand must be physical. So if you, in the same breath, said that God has a hand, but it's not physical, there would be a serious inconsistency there.
Yeah, but what else could a hand mean? That's what I mean.
But that's not the point. So assume I'm wrong. The way I'm using hand is wrong, right? So that's just, it's meaningless, right? It's still not a contradiction, because I don't affirm what you're saying about what the meaning of a hand must be. Even if you're right, it's still not a contradiction for me.
So you're saying the word hand is meaningless?
Look, I'm just making the first point. I'm not saying that. I'm saying assume it is for the sake of argument.
Assume it's meaningless?
For the sake of argument, I'm trying to make the point and explain to you that just because the person is wrong, it doesn't mean that their position is contradictory, right? So wrong. I can be wrong in what I'm saying about a hand not necessarily being physical. That doesn't mean that my position is inconsistent. Do you understand that point?
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
So a contradiction is affirming a proposition, is affirming a proposition and its negation at the same time in the same way.
Yep.
What are those two propositions?
Yeah, those two propositions. So let's say, let's use the hand example. To say Allah has a hand, and of course I know, like obviously as Muslims we don't say this, right? But I'm saying, if you analyze the semantics or the language, when you say Allah has a hand is clearly defined as a physical object. It cannot mean any other thing.
So the contradiction, just to make it easy for you, the contradiction would be a hand is physical and not physical at the same time in the same way.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I don't saying affirm... like it's not a contradiction for other things like life or knowledge, because those are non-physical. They're metaphysical properties.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But firstly, you need to understand that I need to affirm both of those propositions for my position to have a contradiction with it. Do you get that part?
Yeah. And
I don't affirm those two propositions.
You cannot affirm that.
Yeah, that's a different question. So I'm saying, assume I'm wrong about not affirming that the literal meaning of hand entails physicality, right? It necessitates physicality. Assume I'm wrong about that, right?
Yeah.
That's a different point. Unless I affirm that, though, my position is not a contradiction, because I don't affirm a proposition and its negation. My position can be wrong, but it's not necessarily a contradiction. Do you get that part?
Yeah, I get that. I'm just trying to insist on the fact that it's impossible.
Yeah, but that's a different point. That's a different point. Yeah. So insisting on the fact that the word hand entails physicality is a different point from saying that a person who says that it doesn't is committing a contradiction. So you just separate between those two points.
Yeah.
Now because to the point
the reason I'm trying to insist on that is because I feel like if then you can't distinguish between like an Ash'ari and an Athari perspective. Like it all collapses into one and the same thing. Do you see what I'm saying? Because if
What do you mean?
okay, so if you're saying
I mean,
hands, does not mean-
what is the point that if we deny, we would lose the distinction between the Ash'aris and the Atharis?
Okay, so Ash'aris say that, and correct me if I'm wrong, or some of the Maturidis as well, is that these are metaphors. They are, obviously not literal hands or shins or any of that. And the Atharis say the same thing. But the distinguishment is maybe the Ash'aris would take it a step further and just say, okay, that's a metaphor of power. But maybe the Atharis just stop and just say that that's just a metaphor, period, because we do not affirm that it's a physical object. Do you understand?
Yeah, those would be the
No, it's not true.
It's not about physical object. It's not. Forget physical object because nobody affirms.
I know
object.
nobody affirms. I know nobody affirms.
So,
I'm just saying because
but then the
if
distinction
you don't
would
affirm,
be
then it has to mean that you consider it a metaphor. That's what I'm saying.
okay. So the point is you're making a distinction between Mufawwida, who basically do tafweed of the meaning. They say they don't know what the meaning is, and they can negate what it is and say, well, then what it actually is something that is unknown. And between the Ash'aris who do ta'wil and say it is this specific thing, like let's say power. I don't know how that's related to anything you said, but let me answer your question because that first point is clear, right? That it's not a contradiction because I don't affirm those two propositions. That point is clear, right?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay. Now the second point that you're saying about the angel, right? How the example is meaningful because I'm comparing it to an angel, and the angel is a created thing that can be physical.
Yeah.
The point of the example wasn't to say that God's likeness is that of an angel's. The point was to clarify what it is like to analogically predicate something, to make analogical predication, or metaphorical, according to what Brother Muhammad Hanif was saying about what I was saying. So the point was that you can say something like the angel has a wing, and the word wing here doesn't have to entail certain aspects that some people regard, or maybe in
certain aspects
as part of the custom, it is understood as something that must have feathers, right? So it doesn't have to have that thing that you regard as an essential attribute of the feather.
Yeah, but it's still like a platonic wing in a sense, right?
What?
It's like a platonic idea of a wing. Like
do you believe angels have wings?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe angels have wings?
Yes.
Do you believe that they are like the wings of birds and have feathers?
Depends what you mean by like. If they have feathers, then I don't know if they have feathers or not. I mean, I would imagine
that's the point. So what is it that they have?
But it's
that one second, Muhammad. Muhammad. What is it that the angels have that makes your attribution of wingness to them correct?
So it's an attachment to their body that allows them to fly.
Okay, so what are their bodies like? What
we don't know. We haven't seen it, but we know that angels are physical beings.
Wait, okay, so you don't know. So you don't know what these words entail.
No, I do.
But you have some sense of analogy between what is observable and what is unobservable about angels. So you're saying that there is something about the wing of an angel that is analogous to, although not necessarily in any way similar.
That's where I disagree, brother. Where I disagree is it's a false analogy because at the end of the day, there is a level of similarity between the wings of an angel and the wings of a created thing.
I'm not saying there isn't. I'm saying that similarity can be expressed in many different ways. For example, what Brother Hanif was saying yesterday is that it has something that allows it like the function of doing these tasks that Allah gave it. That like ascending and descending, for example. Now, what that is, you can't picture it.
And that's related. No, you can picture it because at the end of the day, it's related to just physical.
What do you mean you can picture it? Can you tell me what an angel looks like?
This is a very physical idea that we can grasp. But when it comes to
can you tell me what an angel looks like?
That has nothing to do with the idea.
Yeah, it does, because I'm saying you can't picture it in the sense that you don't know what an angel looks like, yet you understand what these words mean.
No, I don't know what the wing looks like, but I understand it has an object on its body that allows it to ascend and descend. So,
but you don't know what physicality for an angel really means. Like, so if you talk about dimensions, for example,
I
is
mean,
a wing
Jibril
is
alayhi
an
salam
angel
came to the Prophet
necessarily
physically.
3-dimensional?
I mean, the Prophet ﷺ used to see Jibril alayhi salam physically. So
That's regardless. That's the point. That's a
No.
capability Allah gave him. That's not the point.
Yes, so angels do manifest physically.
That's
But
not.
Muhammad,
See, the point is, right now
would
you're
you
going to be
say-
equivocating on physically here because you don't
Uh-huh.
even know what that means when it comes to an angel. So, for example, an angel can be right in front of you here, right now, with us,
Mhm.
yet we have no means of detecting it.
Yes, that's true.
Are you certain that an angel is this 3-dimensional being that is, I don't know, physical in the sense that it's reducible to atoms and particles, or that it's light in the same way you understand light to be? Muhammad, let me finish my sentences, and then I'll let you finish yours.
No, because you're not
So
understanding what I'm
do you
saying,
understand that it has to be light in the same way we experience light, or that it is physical in the sense that it's maybe reducible to atoms and particles? Is any of that necessary? The answer has to be no, because you don't know, yet you understand that there's some kind of analogy between things that fly, having wings, and an angel having wings.
Okay, so you
Go
do
on.
agree with me. So because there is an analogy that an angel can ascend and descend, then it has wings in that sense, just like created things that we can observe in our physical reality. So
Not
it
in that
does
sense.
have.
If it's in that sense, you're going to have to explain to me in what sense you mean.
Okay, so do you agree with me that if an angel has wings, then we understand that it has wings by virtue that it can fly or ascend and descend? Or is just wing like just
Yeah, in a
some
manner
very
that we don't
obscure
know.
metaphor that
Do
we
you know
can't
how
even
an angel
understand
ascends and
whatsoever?
descends and flies? No, you
I
don't.
don't know how. I don't know
That's
how.
the point, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's the
I
point.
know it does. I know it does by virtue of its wings. Do you see what I'm saying?
So Muhammad, that is my point. What I'm saying is you are able to affirm these things of the angel, like ascending and descending,
brother,
without
exactly.
having
what I'm
any
saying
knowledge
is-
or making any claims about the howness or the actual reality of how this occurs. So how in the world are you going to say that necessarily it must entail this visible aspect of a thing I'm seeing? You can't say that because
Yeah, it has-
you understand it without necessarily applying a mental image to it, that, oh, it must look like this in order for me to say this word about it. You don't do that.
I think you're concentrating too much on the fact that I can't physically see an angel, but please hear me out, okay? Because I listen to you, but you don't listen sufficiently to me.
Go ahead.
What I'm saying is, yeah, I can't see an angel. I don't know if it's a 3-dimensional creature. I don't know any of that, but it's irrelevant because I know that they can physically ascend and descend. Now,
what do you mean by physically?
Within our universe, even though I can't see them.
What do you mean physical? What is a physical object?
Right. By physically, I mean within the universe. Even if I can't see them, then within our universe, not metaphysically, not outside the universe.
So physical is a description of where something is, not what something is made of? Well, then by that definition, everybody agrees that God is not physical, even as per your accusations wouldn't make sense because God is not in the universe.
Yeah, so in that sense, God is not physical. Yes. Now.
Okay, but
the
you
reason
mean something.
I'm using that analogy. The reason I'm using that analogy.
You're saying, Muhammad, listen. You are saying that what it means to be physical is to be in the universe.
Abdulrahman, let him finish his point just really quickly.
Let me just make this point. The reason why I disagree with that analogy is because at the end of the day, there is an analogous nature between the ascension and descension of an angel and our created creatures that we are familiar with. Now, when it comes to a hand, it is impossible to even conceive of any analogy whatsoever. So
that's your claim that you're incapable of defending right now, because I'm asking you questions. Yeah. I'm asking. So let's look at this example right now. The question I just asked of what it means for something to be physical. You said it means for it to be within the universe. Is that your answer?
Yes.
Well, by that definition, you're saying, so you telling, let's say, somebody who affirms attributes in a specific way that for them God would be physical is meaningless, because for them God is not in the universe. So any accusation of physicality doesn't make sense as per your definition of what a physical thing is.
No, I'm not accusing them of physicality. I'm saying that it's incoherent.
No, that's not the point.
I'm not saying you're saying I'm saying it's incoherent. There's a difference.
Okay, so right now, just by the fact that something is outside of the universe, it cannot be physical.
Yes.
regardless of anything else about its actual, like,
Yes.
ontology
Yes,
and
yes,
nature.
yes. Now, yeah, you
Okay,
might
fine.
disagree
So
with that, but I'm
what's
just
your
saying,
problem then?
yeah, my problem is like if
So if something has a
somebody tells
hand and it's
me, yeah,
outside of the universe, it's not a physical hand by your definition.
then the word hand ceases to have meaning, because
No, but
hand
that
is,
doesn't make sense, because right now you have a different understanding of what physical is that you're sneaking in here. You're basically saying that a hand has to have a specific makeup, and that's what you mean by physicality, not the fact that it is located in a specific place and not in another. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. So if it's if you're sticking to your definition that physicality is basically that that is which within the universe, then a hand outside of the universe is not physical. So
I think it's
where's your
impossible
problem?
to have a hand outside the universe.
Why?
In the sense, because anything outside the set of the universe must be different.
Yeah, but then right now you're not just defining physicality by being inside the universe. You're saying there's a feature of things inside the universe that is not just limited to it being inside the universe, and that feature cannot apply to things outside the universe. Now, what is that feature? So right now you can't use this whole thing about it being in the universe anymore. That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't apply, because just by definition, something being outside of it is automatically not physical. So your hand objection doesn't work. So you mean something else.
Okay, like I'm doing my best to understand what you mean, brother. So you might have to work a little bit with me here. We as human beings, we created words and we have definitions of them. So what I mean by physical and within the universe is like when we say hand has a very explicit meaning in terms of what we perceive. So by definition, if anything outside the universe has a hand, then it ceases to be a hand because the definition doesn't apply anymore. Do you see what I mean?
What's that definition?
Well, I mean, it's going to obviously be very hard to pinpoint, but there's a general sentiment of what a hand is. It's, an attachment to an arm that you can grip and you can, just do normal functions with.
So when an angel flies out of the universe, does it cease to be physical?
Does it cease to be physical? I mean, I want to say yes. But how is that relevant?
How is it relevant?
Yes.
It's just displaying how incoherent, no disrespect, your definition of physical is. It's not incoherent, it's just unhelpful. You're just defining physical by location. It's just depending on whether it's in the universe or not.
Abdulrahman, maybe this point might help. It's like, for example, the angel of death. Angel of death takes the souls of people, and there are multiple people in the world who are going to be dying simultaneously. So how is it the angel of death is physical and is able to be temporal and spatially located at multiple positions at the same time?
We don't know.
Exactly, it's a mystery, because when we talk about physicality in the sense of angels, it is something which is beyond our comprehension, and I think that's the point that Abdulrahman is trying to say. So when we say that it is a physical being, we're saying there's a physical being that is literally beyond our ability to comprehend. So when we apply terms like wings to a physical being which is beyond our comprehension, it would by default or entailment be something that we wouldn't be able to comprehend either.
Sure.
In a univocal way, and the only possible way that you could maybe comprehend it is in terms of an attribute of function. Like,
okay,
for
so
example, God is merciful. So that's an attribute of function.
So I'm definitely doing this on the fly. So maybe my definitions are problematic, and maybe they are in a certain sense internally inconsistent. I'm not saying like I have some grand philosophical theory or whatever, but the idea I'm trying to say is like even if something is beyond the universe, that is incomparable to Allah, because the heaven is beyond the universe. There's an entire world beyond the universe, but that doesn't automatically put it on the same metaphysical level as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if we do say
we're all in agreement about that.
So that's what I'm appealing to, is that yes, even if I do accept, which I do, that angels outside the universe have wings, there is still a level of similarity between a wing outside the universe and a wing inside the universe, in the sense that Allah could create things outside the universe that are similar, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fundamentally dissimilar. So I don't see how when we say that Allah has a hand,
So
it's
look,
nothing
so
but
the idea
a
is
metaphor.
not about the level of similarity or dissimilarity here. That's not the point about the angels. The point that you're supposed to understand from this is that you are able to comprehend what you predicate of angels, despite you having no clue what necessary and sufficient conditions must in reality apply in order for a wing to be called a wing. You don't know. You're not giving answers, but then you still understand what it means. There's some notion of similarity, whether that's in
I
terms
honestly
of function,
disagree. I can tell you
structure,
explicitly
whatever.
what I feel
What?
is. I can tell you explicitly what I feel is the property that angels possess that makes them have wings. It's a property of ascension and descension. Okay,
That's not
but
the point. You're still missing even ascension and descension. The same thing is going to apply. However, you're just going to be, kicking the can down the road. But the point is that you have no idea of the kayfiyya of either the wing or ascension and descension, yet you predicate these terms intelligibly
kayfiyya is
of the
irrelevant.
angel.
It's the fact
That's
that
the point.
there is an ascension and descension that makes it have a wing.
How
but
does
there are
ascension
things.
descend?
There are things that ascend and descend that don't have wings, right?
That's a good
Yeah,
point.
like your
actually.
soul.
Yeah, but we don't, like, Allah never told us that it has wings in the first place.
Yeah, but there are plenty of. But the point is, any sort of attribute or property that you can ascribe, that's the point of what we're trying to say about the ontology and the theory of language that's being represented. We reject that there's this idea that there's this shared property in my hand and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hand. We reject that.
Yeah, and I reject that too. That's
but
the
I'm
whole
saying it's going to
point
be the same
of why
thing
I'm
for
asking
any
this
other
question.
attribute. It's going to be the same thing for any other attribute. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge?
Okay, just a quick question. If I display mercy to somebody or something, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we understand Allah is merciful, can we say that there is an infinitely small extent to which my mercy is similar to Allah's mercy?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. That's what I was asking with the knowledge.
Well, what I would say is, and I don't know if it's Islamically permissible to say this or not, so you'd have to probably let me know, but I would say yes, there is a similarity in a sense. Obviously, my mercy is nothing like Allah's mercy, but the two properties are similar, yes. Yeah,
so then you don't have a problem with Teshbih. You don't have a problem with there being a level of similarity between an attribute that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possesses
and that's what
something in creation.
Abstract ideas, I don't have a problem, like consciousness, like life, all those things.
So
but I mean hand and foot and...
So you don't have a problem with similarity. You have a problem with a specific type of similarity, which is in the interest of... In the instance of Yad Allah, for example, you think that necessitates a certain type of similarity, which is physicality, and that is unacceptable. That's basically your claim. Yeah, well, we're just denying that that's the case.
Yeah, I feel like...
and by the way, an important point to make about what Jake's saying right now is that, I mean, so many of like the self-proclaimed rationalists who are really incapable of dissecting these different positions and actually analyzing them see what you're saying right now, Muhammad Islam. So many of this of these schools that some of the brothers that we've been involved with see what you're saying right now just as much in terms of Teshbih as predicating hand of God is, in the sense that they only focus on the whole hand thing with the Salafi because it just sounds bad, and they just do that. But if they're genuine, then there's really no difference between that and between you saying that there is a notion of similarity between your knowledge or your mercy and God's knowledge or God's mercy.
Yeah, they would attack the same. They would attack you for the same reason. It's just one attribute instead of another.
Yeah, they actually won't do that explicitly because
just a bit. Attack me over what? Sorry.
They would attack you for the people that have a problem with there being a supposed similarity between Yad Allah and some type of hand in creation, if a person is consistent, they're going to attack you for saying that there's a similarity between the mercy of Allah and mercy in creation.
Yeah,
that's what they do. Those who are actually consistent, and I don't have to name names, but that's their position, to the point where it becomes a radical sort of agnosticism about God. Now, forget about Yad Allah. You can't say that Allah has knowledge. You can't say that he has power. Why? Because there's power and knowledge in creation. That's what it resorts to. And it's just a spiral all the way down.
What
to
would
where
you say?
it's
Would you say
meaningless.
there is a similarity between our mercy and Allah's, or no?
Yeah, in terms of the meaning of the two words, there's a similarity.
Yeah. But in terms of the meaning of hand, there is no similarity.
No. Wait,
No.
wait. See, just as you said, Muhammad Hassan, that there can be this, very tiny notion of similarity that just allows for you to say you have mercy and God has mercy, yet they're nothing alike.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing could be said of hand.
No. I didn't say they're nothing alike. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows mercy to somebody like on earth.
He said they were alike. He said they were alike in the small portion.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying.
Keep going.
I'm saying if that one doesn't apply to tashbih, why would saying the same thing about hand apply?
I would
to
say
tashbih?
it doesn't
remember,
apply to
nobody's
tashbih.
saying anything about physicality or it looking in any specific way or any of that stuff, because even those words they're quite vague.
Yeah.
Especially in a metaphysical discussion. So if you can say that and you don't fall into tashbih. In the same breath, you want to accuse the person who affirms another attribute.
And maybe I misunderstood tashbih, but I'm kind of understanding tashbih in a very tajsimi kind of way. Like if you make
but that's the thing. Not everybody does. Like you have the people who believe in a radical notion of divine simplicity, where they will say, if you say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has any sifat whatsoever, right? Then you are, in some sense, assimilating him to creation. And then you have a step down from that, the people who affirm certain attributes like power, knowledge, will, etc., right? And they don't think that that's tashbih, but then they will say, well, if you affirm yed, then this is tashbih. And then you have the next group, which says, well, you can affirm that, but you can't affirm a jism, or you can't affirm so and so. It's just constantly down the hill. Each person has a different definition of tashbih, where they say, oh, well, we allow all the way from we don't allow any similarity whatsoever to oh, we allow it in this case but not in others, and constantly going down.
A good point. Yeah.
So that's the reality. Everybody accuses each other.
Right. No, and that's a good point. But do you believe that the correct position is that there is a line to be drawn somewhere, someplace, or that you just use a broad brush and say that tashbih is acceptable across the board?
No, so our position is that the words that apply have a similar meaning. Otherwise, we wouldn't understand at all what's going on. But like you said, it's going to be infinitesimal. Like the point, and this is where people get confused, because they think, well, you're comparing physical creations. It's just to get you to understand something. Like the example that Abdulrahman is using about the wings of an angel. There's a radical difference between that and wings of a bird, for example. So what we would say is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he is greater than that, it's going to be infinitely more the gap between any word that we apply to him and things in creation. That's all that it's meant to establish. That the same way that you could use the same word for two things in creation, and yet, as you saw here, and I'm not saying it as anything bad, but sometimes it's genuinely hard to struggle to say, well, I use the same word for this thing, and I use the same word for this thing, but then when you actually think about it, it's like, well, what do they actually have in common? Some things that you use the same word for, what they actually have in common is very, very small. So imagine the difference between something in creation that has the same name or uses the same name and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say it's even way greater than that. And then that's when we say, when you ask us how it is or the exact function of it is, we can't explain anything like that. We can explain to you what the meaning is and the very small notion that we want to apply. But besides that, we don't go further than that. And when you say, well, what's the drawing line? We want to stick to the Quran and the Sunnah, the revelation. Allah spoke about himself in the way that he did, and we believe it is appropriate. We don't
but all
go
of this
beyond
is interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah, right? Like, I'm asking
Yeah.
for what you believe the interpretation is. Obviously,
Yeah,
like,
but
we
we've
all
been going
strive
over
to
the
follow Quran and
interpretation.
Sunnah, right?
Yeah, we've been going over the interpretation.
Yeah.
Of course, there are going to be certain things that if you claim about Allah, well, first of all, you have to ask the person, right? Because just like you had an idea of what something means, and then you ask us if we have a different meaning, then, well, you could say, oh, Jake, I think you're wrong about what that word means. Fine, but you wouldn't say it's a contradiction. Likewise, if someone is using a word and applying it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first thing we have to do is ask them, what do they mean by this? This is what all the scholars do regardless, right? And then based on that, they're going to come up with some type of judgment. They're going to say, well, that term is not mentioned in Quran and Sunnah, so you probably shouldn't use it, but the meaning of it is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Or something might be, well, it is mentioned, but it's not the meaning that you think it is. There's so many different options for it.
Okay, brother,
You can't
I
just
have
give
a
one
question.
example.
Maybe that'll help.
No, sorry,
Before you go on to the question, before you go on to the
I was going to say, I think what it is, the problem is we're going to have to move on because we've got two more guests. So, but Jazakallah
Can I just ask you just one more question? Because I do feel like this is actually very significant to the topic at hand, which is the topic of mystery, because this is all very mysterious. Not in the sense that it's confusing, but in the sense that we're talking about metaphysical properties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and and its interpretations can sound like an appeal to mystery to a lot of people. So if you have time, maybe just one more question.
Yeah, but I think that's the whole point of raising this as an example, because the point here is saying if a person appeals to mystery on these types of topics and somebody claims it's a contradiction, then they're under the burden of proof to demonstrate it's a contradiction. If they cannot demonstrate it's a contradiction and somebody's saying they're appealing to mystery, then there's no how do you say, there's no issues with regards to that it doesn't make something true or false per se just by appealing
but
to
there's no
mystery.
appeal to mystery unless there's a contradiction.
And if you're justified by the text to adopt this language, then that's fine. Like I think Brother Abdulrahman gave the example of the angels of a wing and angels of creation, other than wings of angels and wings of other creation, how they're so radically different that we can't even comprehend it. Yes, we can think about attribute and we can think about function, but that's about it. We can't conceptualize it or visualize it in our minds. So maybe another example, is a very basic example, is like you've got a person who's blind from birth and you say this sofa is red. Now he may have a conception of color potentially. I don't think he would even have that actually, but he won't be able to conceive what the color red is. There are going to be appeals to mystery because we're talking about the metaphysical, we're talking about the ghaib, isn't it? The unseen.
For example, like we obviously we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has two right hands, and we affirm that. But we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he has two right hands in the sense that his hands are blessed. Now, for example,
that one is understood in that way, Muhammad. It's not a good example. I mean, so it's not like this school of thought rejects all kinds of
What I mean to say is hypothetically, imagine a different context or society that considered left hands as blessed. So what? And of course, I know that you can't say for sure what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, but I'm just raising the idea that would you say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if he said in that context he has two left hands, that would fundamentally be the same thing?
Yeah, because
it means blessings. I mean, didn't you?
Yeah, because you have to understand Part of how the texts are interpreted is based on the Arabic language as understood at that time. So of course it's not like Chinese version of left or right. So yeah, of course it's going to be based on that.
Muhammad, one thing, last thing I'm going to say, and maybe Sharif, if we're rushing me, Muhammad can leave, but he can listen to what I have to say here, is about, the different interpretations thing. Okay, there are going to be different interpretations, but that's not really, the core issue at play in most of these questions. The core issue is that you have certain, metaphysical principles that you hold to, and on that basis, you're concerned with specific interpretations of the Quran. Now, if we look at those metaphysical commitments, for examples, ones that try to say that you couldn't attribute this or that of God, or ones that talk about composition and multiplicity, if we look at them on their own grounds, our claim is that they never, indicate any type of rational necessity, in the sense that you must hold to this principle, otherwise you're irrational. No, I don't think anyone agrees with that. At least people who know this topic really well, and in that sense, it's going to depend on what your metaphysical principles are going to the text. If you don't see a problem with specific things that certain schools do see a problem with, like, for example, composition and what they call composition or multiplicity, then it's going to be irrelevant what the actual reading of the text is. You'll say, okay, let's look at the Arabic language, let's look at the tafsir, let's look at what the Sahaba understood, what the Prophet understood, what is the most likely interpretation given the rules of the language and the interpretations of the time, and we'll accept that, because you don't have any kind of metaphysical import that you're bringing in that forces you to twist the interpretation.
I think it's impossible not to have a metaphysical import.
What I mean is, of course, you're right. But in the sense, I mean in that sense, about those specific aspects that certain people hold to, and on the basis of those aspects, they sort of interpret the Quran in a specific way that is not the zahir or the apparent, as in that they'd see the apparent meaning and be like, oh, this is problematic. Now let's reinterpret it into another meaning. Now, I find it very problematic that Allah would speak in a language, or would reveal his revelation in a language that, the apparent of which is actually problematic and anthropomorphic. I'd find that as a problem. But that's just the point I wanted to make about, the metaphysical principles actually influencing what you, or how you're going to look at the interpretations.
Yeah. I guess I was
Muhammad, Muhammad, I'm going to have to move on, so I really apologize.
Jazakallah guys for your time. Brother Abdulrahman, right before I leave, actually, just got a quick question for you. Did you happen to go to IAS back in Malaysia?
Yeah.
Good to see you again, brother. Good to see you. Okay. Yeah, let's jazakallah khair, guys. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Is that a stalker, Abdulrahman?
The name doesn't look familiar, but yeah, maybe an old friend or something.
Alhamdulillah, good. Okay, so I was going to add the wrong person then. Salams Bauer, Jazakallah khair for waiting. I know you commented in the private chat that you wanted to come on to answer his question as well.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, good. So are you going to make a comment or question?
No, I just wanted to make a comment about. I'm hoping that brother Muhammad Isam, if I'm not mistaken, he's still watching, because there's few points that we need to talk about and not to ignore, because our primary source from our religion is Quran. And for example, he's talking about the hand of God. Before we talk about this, because this is beyond our understanding, according what Allah and our Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam says about this. Before this, for example, Allah talks about fakihah, the fruits in heaven. Can you like say that the fruit that Allah is talking about is the same fruit that we eat today? Of course not. And saying extra things about Allah, it's not allowed, because we are, as Muslims, we are not allowed to say anything about Allah that Allah himself didn't say them about himself. And for one last thing I want to mention, for Brother Muhammad, I hope that he can read Arabic, and he can recite the third surah from the seventh ayah. And Allah specifically is talking about this issue, which people are making like assumptions and stuff like that about Allah. That's all, nothing else. So we don't have to make it so complicated. It's very easy to understand the Quran, and whoever wants to understand it, he will do that. And whoever wants to doubt it, I think he will be living in doubt, nothing else.
No, Jazakallah khair, bro. No, you make a very good point in terms of the fact that some of these types of discussions might come across quite complex and philosophical, but they became philosophical or complex because of the way people, different sects, or even externally from Christians, how they try to undermine Islam on some of these types of points, whether it's the hand of Allah, whether it's to do with the speech of Allah, the Quran, etc., and how they, it sort of multiplied into lots of debates and discussions. But from an ordinary Muslim point of view, these types of discussions and these types of, in this type of way of discussing it, as the brothers have discussed it here, is not necessary anyway in terms of achieving salvation. As Muslims, when we look at these verses, we take the general apparent meaning that just comes to our head, and that's about it, really. When we talk about these things, we don't really go into the depth of talking about the sifat of Allah and how is it literal, metaphorical, how is it taken literally, this, that, and the other. There are certain fundamental things that we accept, as you mentioned, the verse about how we view the Quran through the muhkam, or these aspects through the clear cut, and that the mutashabihat, those things which are maybe not readily acceptable, we look at it from that perspective. And I think that's a general perspective that we look at. And then the mutashabihat that cannot be fully comprehended from the mind, this is where, it's because human beings are limited, and maybe the text is in terms of explaining fully the reality of the ghaib on these matters, and so we're justified in appealing to a mystery in that sense, or justified in terms of not being able to fully comprehend these matters of the ghaib, which we're not necessitated to know anyway for our salvation.
Exactly, that's not a part of our salvation. And one more thing, for example, Allah names our Prophet ﷺ An-Nabi al-Ummi, like the illiterate prophet. But if we talk about this illiterate prophet, actually, he knows way more about, or way more than the philosophers and the most intelligent people that we know throughout the history. So, like this Ummi, if in Arabic, actually it's Ummi about the religion. It's like you have to just to follow, not a blind. Like we're not blind followers, but as Muslims we have to accept that what Allah says is true. And just like I said, if Allah didn't say something about Himself, we cannot explain that. It doesn't matter what it is. You know what I mean?
Okay, Jazakallah. Yeah, no, Jazakallah for your comment. We're going to move on to the other guest, but I appreciate you coming on.
Okay, bro.
I don't know if Jazakallah. Just stay tuned. I think the other brothers might want to comment as well, but Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay.
So I need to go through these quickly because we've been on for a while. So apologies if you feel rushed. But yeah, Uzair, assalamu alaikum. How are you, brother? Are you there, Uzair?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
So
have you got
sorry?
Have you got a comment or question on the topic?
Yeah, so it was kind of leading up from the discussion that you had before. So I don't want to rehash any of the old arguments, because you guys have been talking for a while. let's just. I actually want to just talk about the concept of just determinism and free will. So how exactly are people often appeal to mystery regarding those two. I'm not sure how that's not seen as a contradiction. How you can have both free will and a deterministic set of affairs. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Okay, that's a good question, actually. Just about linked to the topic.
Yeah,
So
maybe that's
this-
another aspect of mystery we didn't talk about.
Yeah, I mean,
I remember Brother Ed Muad. I think you guys know him. I remember a status here, or it was a comment that was very nice about paradoxes and when it is valid to appeal to mystery and when it isn't. And one of the aspects he mentioned in that comment that I still remember was that if you arrive at the truth of both horns of the apparent contradiction or the paradox through necessary and sound reasoning, then you have a much better case to appeal to mystery than if you don't, right? As in, if I arrive at free will through a sound method, and I arrive at, I don't know what you want to call it, determinism, or because not everybody's going to agree with it, but not hard determinism, but determinism soundly as well, then that's not a contradiction, but then there's apparent paradox here that it's, you could just leave it at that, or you could try to work it out. But then the reason it's different as well is that there's no real explicit contradiction, because there are different accounts of what free will is, and there are different accounts of what determinism entails, right? So that's going to be a whole discussion on its own. I mean, so you're going to have the incompatibilists who, if they do see determinism and free will as incompatible, they will say that, well, either, they'll either take a hard determinist stance where there's no free will, or they'll be like libertarians about free will. Or compatibilists have ways to say that it's not, inconsistent to hold to both of these notions at the same time, and they have different explanations for that. That's very different from like questions of like identity and you being a thing and its negation at the same time in the same way. So it's not really as straightforward as that.
Just to like ask for clarification, like the compatibilistic approach to this discussion, isn't it often just that the will is just reduced, or it's illusionary? Like even from the intuitive perspective, if you try identifying a will, I guess that's more of like an epistemological thing to do. But if you just looked at what really is a will, wouldn't it kind of just be like an illusion? Like even the compatibilists would be arguing that the will is actually just an illusion here. So my question is,
I don't
like,
think the compatibilists would argue that. They just wouldn't be libertarians about free will. I mean, they'd have a different understanding of what free will is.
But so if it's not libertarian free will, and to be fair, I'm not really read up on the literature, so I wouldn't know. But my only thing is, like, if it's not libertarian free will, then is it even like a will at all? Because at that point, it's kind of just like it seems very illusionary. I'm not sure if I'm making
but
sense.
your question kind of begs the question for the libertarian's position. So yeah, well, clearly, if you're a libertarian, that's how you're going to see it. But it kind of begs the question if you're talking to a compatibilist and you say, well, if libertarian free will is not true, then there is no free will. But that's kind of the point of dispute. So it's understandable that you say that, provided you're a libertarian, but it's not going to really do any work in your discussion with a compatibilist, because that is the very point that needs to be discussed.
Okay. I mean, like I said, I'm not really well put on this literature. I
mean, we can give a more detailed answer, but maybe we need a whole stream about this. But
yeah,
I think if we delve deeper into it, it's going to take us a bit far off,
that
the
makes
actual
sense.
discussion. Although, to be fair, the past discussion did as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. If Sharif, I don't know what you think.
No, I think we're gonna move. We can talk about it, but I think it might be best to move on.
So maybe we'll set up a stream for that.
Well. Yeah, because otherwise we won't do it justice, to be honest. But yeah, I think the issue then becomes what's the definition of will? Yeah, who's an agent in that situation? And there's going to be different understandings of that. But I think the main point that maybe to understand us is when somebody argues something is a logical contradiction, the bar is incredibly high to demonstrate that it is a logical contradiction. It's not easy to demonstrate something is a logical contradiction because he just needs one little way out in order to sort of give a possible meaning to the words that he's saying in order to avoid a logical contradiction. So, like I said, this idea of free will and determinism, if there's one way out in terms of the way they define their terms, then you can't really apply it as a logical contradiction in that sense. Does that make sense, Jose?
Yeah. I see 100% what you're saying. I don't want to take up any of your time, so
No problem.
that makes sense. Appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. Intro.
Oh.
It's okay. What's up? Right. So we have LPT sucks. I assume that's logical problem of the Trinity.
How you guys doing?
I'm doing okay.
I would like you guys to do a favor for me. Can you please tell, because I'm going to be clipping this, can you tell my Christian brothers and sisters that the LPT only works if you hold to the so-called Orthodox position, especially as it relates to the incarnation?
Sounds very familiar.
Well,
This voice.
Yeah, this is
His
Terry.
voice sounds very familiar. Yeah.
Can you just tell my friends that the LPT only works as it relates to the Orthodox positions? Because
this is Jake's discussion. Jake, where'd you go, man? Come back for this.
No, because I think I already discussed this with Jake, and he couldn't find any logical problems. What he did is try to show me scripturally that I was wrong. That didn't work either, but he tried the logical way.
Talking about. I don't think you really believe in the Trinity, do you, Terry?
I do. I came with the sun analogy, which is again infallible and has yet to be refuted by anybody. You, Mansoor, it's all on my channel. So
no, it doesn't work.
Father
is God, Son is God, Holy Spirit's God. You have three gods.
Well, yeah. See, the problem with the LPT, I didn't want to go to the Trinity because I already did this with you. I wanted to do this for the incarnation because I did a debate with Matt Slick, and you're going to be debating him soon. So I debated this specific issue, and I wanted to add layers to it. But as far as your the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, Scripture doesn't reveal this model that you're trying to present. The Father is called Theon, God, an exclusive title to Him. So unless you address that or apply that to your
is
equation,
the Son God?
Theos, He's called Theos. Yes.
Is He God?
Theos, as per his, if you want to identify Him. When it says God in the Greek, it's theos. When it says Father, it's theon. So there's a different qualification as it relates to the person. So you're gonna have to add that to your equation.
Are they different gods?
I just gave you an application of the word God in the Greek. Theon for the Father, theos for the Son, theos for the Holy Spirit. So you have to.
Yeah, are they God in the same way or not?
How are you applying the word God in this sense?
I'm asking you, are they God in the same way or not?
Not as it relates to a person, no.
Okay, so then they're not the same God.
Not as it relates to person, they share the same qualities, though. The sun analogy, the rays, the heat, at the point of origin.
What makes them God? The fact that they share the same qualities?
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay, and each one of them have those qualities, so they each have fully what it takes to be God. So each one of them is a God. There's three gods.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Not unless, because the Son is within the Father. You cannot remove the Son from the Father or the Holy Spirit from the Father. So when you're speaking to the Father, the Son is within Him and the Holy Spirit is within Him. The same thing I said about the sun analogy. The rays and the heat at the point of origin is the Son, S-U-N. So as it relates to the operational relationship between the persons of the Godhead, the Son, S-O-N, is within the bosom of the Father, and He projects from the Father. He is the rays, the humility of the Father, by which he can engage with his creation and sustain his creation, which is problematic for the Islamic God, but that's a whole different issue. I'm willing to defend my God. The fact still remains, He is the Son, S-O-N, is the Son, S-U-N, at the point of origin, and He is the rays, the humility of the Father. So He holds both positions simultaneously. So as it relates to the operational relationship of the persons of the Godhead, we see Father is the S-U-N, Son is the rays, the Holy Spirit is the heat. But as it relates to the nature, all three of them are at the point of origin is the S-U-N Son. So they share the same nature in that way. Can you argue against that?
Yeah, Ben, you still have three gods because you have three individuals. You have three individuals which are each fully God, and they're not each other. Is three gods. It doesn't matter the fact that they're inseparable in terms of spatial location or anything like that. The way in which we count objects is we count objects by the amount of individuals that possess a certain quality. And in this case, we have three individuals which are not identical to each other, and they're each called God. There's three gods.
Okay, so so I'm going to address your point. I'm just going to clearly stipulate that you did not address the fact that there's a distinction of the Greek word God as it relates to the Father or Son. You didn't address that. You didn't address the Son analogy that he, at this point of origin, the Son and the Holy Spirit is the Son, S-U-N, same nature.
Yeah, the Son analogy doesn't work. It's Arianism. They don't have the same nature. The Son doesn't have the same nature as the
No
rays.
problem. I'm going to address your point. I'm going to address your latest point. I totally disagree with
Terry, this is largely irrelevant to the stream. This is way off track.
You're talking about the LPT. I'm going to address your last point, and I'm going to show again how illogical your position is, because you suggested that somehow, because there are three persons in eternality sharing the same eternal essence, somehow that's three gods. Can you explain to me how you can have three units in eternality? Because you're talking about LPT,
I don't know
right?
what that question means. Three units in eternality.
Okay, can you have a unit? Can you have a unit in eternal reality? Can you have a unit? Can you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Since 1, 2, 3 relates to temporal.
You're a popular guy.
Can you answer the question? How can you have units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in eternality, please? Just for my people, my Christians.
Because the way in which we count is by identity. So if you have two things, the way in which you know and you count two things is by the fact that they have different properties. So counting has nothing to do with time or temporality or things changing or anything like that. We can count individuals based on the fact that there are things which do not possess all the same properties.
So I want to make sure to all of your people that's listening to you, you're saying numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 can exist in eternality. An eternal reality.
Correct, because in eternality, don't you have three persons, or do you only have one person?
No. I'm using my language in temporal space to describe it. But
do you have three persons in eternality?
In all seriousness, I'm just using human language. No, I'm trying to finalize the statement. It's like me saying your God has two right hands. You're gonna give me an explanation.
Do you have three persons in eternality or not? Does it only become three
according to human language? According to human language, yes. But the reality of it is there's the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and they're echad, united. That's it.
So in reality, there's only one person.
I'm going to repeat. In eternality, if you're using Hebraic, the Hebraic, if you're holding to the Hebraic narrative, there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's not 1, 2, 3 persons. That's nowhere in Scripture. There's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and they're echad, united. That's it. That's all that's revealed in Scripture. I'm using human language to entertain your.
Are they? Can you count? Father is 1, Son is 2, and Spirit is 3.
Using human language, but the reality of the fact is there's no numbers or mathematics or numbers do not apply to the eternal reality. You're suggesting
is God one? Is there one God in eternality?
There's a unified God. Echad.
But there's not one. There's not one God in eternality.
If you're using human language, yes.
Okay, so in the same way that there's one God in eternality, there's three persons in eternality.
Using human language. Yeah, using human language.
Okay,
yes.
So why were you averse to doing that before? It's because it results in there being three gods, but you didn't want to do it. You were willing to do it when it came to saying that there's one God. That's the difference.
Maybe I don't express myself too well. I'm going to repeat my position.
I know you don't.
I thought I made myself very clear. I said if I'm going to use human language from my perspective, I could say one God with three persons. The reality of the fact is not difference. Reality. Okay, the true reality of the
What's
eternal
the reality?
reality.
Give me the
There's
raw
not three.
fact.
There's not three persons because three does not
And the
exist in eternality.
reality is, if numbers don't exist in eternality, in reality, then there's not three persons in reality in eternality, and there's also not one God.
No, I thought I said human perspective and reality. There's
Exactly.
two different realities.
In eternality, from God's perspective, there's not three persons,
Okay.
and there's not one God.
Okay, no problem. So from your God perspective, he doesn't have two right hands.
No.
You say
No.
your arguing goes against your understanding of.
You just said from God's perspective,
Yes.
in eternality and reality, there is not one God.
There's a unified God, a God God, yes.
Okay, there's an Echad God, but there's not a one God. There's no one God.
Who are distinguished as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Okay, thank you very much. Make sure you clip this out and put down the part where you said
No, but
in reality,
I don't know.
in eternality, there is not one God according to God himself.
No, from human perspective, I could say one God, three persons. From God's perspective, there's only Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The number one does not apply.
From God's perspective, there's not one
Number
God.
one, number two, number three, numbers do not apply to the eternal reality. And if I'm going to apply the same consistency with you, then your God having two right hand makes I have to use human standards to describe what that means.
One God according to you, sir. I appreciate
I'm sorry, what did you say?
According to you, God himself does not believe that there is one God in eternity past.
No, he doesn't say, hey guys, there's one God from eternity past. He doesn't say that. He recognizes.
He doesn't know one God exists.
Huh?
He doesn't know one God exists.
No one God, because he doesn't use numbers. He denies his self-existence? Are you serious? Come on, Jake. You're gonna be debating Mac. Do better than this, Mac. Do better than this,
you just
Jake.
said there's not one God according to God in eternity past.
No, he doesn't say. He doesn't. Let me make it clear. He doesn't say. Hey, guys, there's one God in three persons. He doesn't say that.
No, he
recognizes himself.
He does not say or recognize. You said he doesn't even recognize because there's no counting, there's no numbers, so there's not one God.
No, again, one. You're using the word one as it relates to human standards. I'm saying he recognizes his existence and he recognizes the distinguishing between the persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, using human standards.
Is there a number one in God's standards that's different than human standards?
Yes, because number one doesn't apply to him. It applies to us.
Okay. So numbers apply to creation, but numbers don't apply to God. So we can't say there's one God according to God.
No, you could say it. He won't say it. That's the point.
Okay, so he
What's
doesn't
so hard
know
for you to
that
understand?
So God does not know that there's only one God.
Okay, I'm gonna try to. Maybe it's me who's. I have a problem explaining myself. When you had a guy just not too long ago said your God has two right hands. Does it? Not even two right hands. A hand. Does the word hand apply the same way for God? Yes or no? Be consistent, because if you're going to say 1, 2, 3 has to apply to me,
it has nothing to do with it. We're talking.
It's the same thing.
If we said, does God
it's
have
the same thing.
attribute? If God has an attribute, one attribute, which is knowledge, yes, that's one attribute. A second attribute, which is power, yes, we can.
I didn't talk about one attribute. I'm talking about hands.
We can number it. One hand, one attribute.
No. Listen clearly to the point I'm making. You're using that word hand. Your God has hands.
That is irrelevant to counting.
How is it irrelevant? You're telling me I have to apply.
We can count one hand, two hands, one knowledge, one power, one will.
That's not even the argument I'm making. That's not even the argument I'm making.
Yeah,
I'm saying
you're
using human standards for number 1, 2, and 3 human standard, and you're trying to apply that to the eternal reality. I'm saying, okay, if you're gonna do that, you see, you're not letting me finish because you got caught again. Let me finish my statement. If you're gonna use human standards as it relates to numbers,
I'm done with this guy.
I'm just gonna finalize this statement. If you're gonna use human standards,
give up while you're
okay,
still alive,
no
man.
problem.
I mean, come on,
what did you say, Abdul?
they say give up while you're ahead, but you're not even ahead. I mean, just give up while you're still breathing. I mean,
Okay,
come on.
Abdul,
It's like
what's the point? What's the point I'm making?
Everything you said is just refuting its own self, and he just
Can
demonstrated.
you give me an
that,
example?
5 times in a row? Yet your
give me an
confidence
example.
is unaffected. I'm
No, but
thinking
give me
this
an
can go on
example.
forever.
No, can you give me an
I think
example?
your confidence is increasing. Like it's,
I know, but that's a claim. Can you give me an example? Explain to me how me saying using human standards. Can I just find out? This is the reason why you're interrupting me, because you know I made a point. How the fact that me using human standards to say there's one God, but it doesn't apply to God in his eternal reality, is not synonymous to the fact that me saying your God has hands doesn't mean he has hands like us.
That's not the same thing.
Human standards, and both of them are using human standards. Human standards for hands, human standards for numbers. Human standard for hands, human standard for numbers.
Can I ask you something?
Okay.
Yeah.
You got caught again.
Did you use the LPT on Matt Slick? Did you use it on him?
Did you not see I served you the delicieux. I sent it to you.
I asked you a question. Did you use the LPT on Matt Slick?
Never. Why would I use your argument? I got my own delicious arguments. Why would I use your arguments? hey, why would I use your arguments? Hey, I have my own argument that God revealed to me for the incarnation.
You can watch this Friday and see what happens with Matt Slick.
I know you're probably going to win against that. You probably, but the thing is that he's going to be on the hot seat. You don't seem to like to defend your own religion.
So? You think so?
You don't like to defend your own religion. You're always on the attack. There's no defense.
How do you figure that?
Every time I see you trying to defend your God, how many videos I have?
If Matt Slick wants to debate me on Islam, he can debate me.
I saw you with Dr. Dawkins.
You know that every single debate almost that I've ever had was the other person challenging me. I don't ask them for debates; they ask me.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're willing to debate Christianity,
because
the Trinity.
They are asking me for.
I understand, but you don't seem. You're not comfortable to try to defend your own God. That's the point I was making.
How long have I been on here for 2 hours talking about my God?
No, I saw your debate with Dr. Khalil. It didn't look good. You look good against. No problem. Thank you, guys.
Terry, this conversation is not looking too good for yourself. Yeah. So
yeah, there's numbers in eternality. No problem.
Think about yourself.
When God
says in the Quran or even in the Bible that God is one, you're basically saying that
it doesn't say one, like a unit. It doesn't say that. You're inventing things.
In the Quran it does, yeah.
Yeah, I know that's a problem for you guys because you don't even know where your God is.
For us, it's not a problem for us, Terry, because Terry, we don't accept your positions and premises in this conversation.
Is that your argument? Well, what is that supposed to mean? You didn't say nothing serious right there. In eternality. Because that's what you're saying.
Because Terry, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, based upon how I understand numbers and how I understand counting takes place, this is how I'm going to apply it to your religion. Yeah.
No, I said I didn't say my religion. I said eternality. Don't put my religion. Eternality.
I know that, Terry.
Okay, so don't misrepresent me because you're misrepresenting and you're strawmanning my argument. Numbers does not apply to eternality. I think that's logical. Thank you.
Take care, Terry.
You know what's funny? Terry's gonna go away. Gonna go. I beat them. Yeah.
Yeah, he's out of his mind.
He came. He came a couple of probably a month ago where he was talking about some prophecy. Were you on that, Abdulrahman? Were you there?
Yeah. It was on,
about
I think
6
days. It was on Hamza's Dinner here.
7-day week. It was here. And it was like, okay, thank you very much.
But anyway. He's a nice guy.
Well, I think he needs to slow down, reflect, and sort of apply the criteria upon himself. In terms of trying to think these things through before he starts, roll it out. But
he actually has. I mean, he changed some of his views and the language he was using due to having discussions and conversations with me, which he's admitted. And then yet he's coming on here acting like, he's some big shot. I mean, I don't know. He's just a strange guy.
I don't know why was he saying numbers don't apply to eternality?
You can't. Apparently, you can't count in eternity past. Like there's no one God
No
in
one.
eternity past. Yeah, God doesn't know He's one God in eternity past. It's just bizarre. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, there you go. Right. Okay, guys. We've got nobody else. Alhamdulillah. And so I don't know if brothers want to say anything last or any points that we're going to say.
Well, let's be clear. There was one God and still is one God from eternity past. So let's just clear that up. But no, I think it was a good stream. I think there's clearly a difference between mystery and contradiction. It went over the various points of when it's okay to quote unquote accept a mystery in some sense, and that you can't fully understand something. There's no problem with that. Obviously, you can't accept a contradiction or appeal to mystery in light of being shown that your view is contradictory. And we explained that people, for the most part, when they're criticizing Islamic theology and claiming it's contradictory, they're not actually showing an example of a contradiction and A and not A. So this is some advice to the people who are listening now and later on, because I know there'll be people who are trying to do that, especially with me anyway. Do some homework, actually accurately represent our position, and then come and bring a clear contradiction and show the logical problem of Tawheed like we do, but the logical problem of the Trinity. But until then, really, I think it's pointless to even consider, because you guys cannot even show a logical contradiction. I don't even know, maybe if they don't know what it is, but that's a whole nother story. And you should watch our stream. We actually did a whole stream on what is, I think, logical contradiction.
Yeah, we did. We did.
Which people should check that out. We actually did a whole stream, I think, on logical contradiction, and I think we did a whole stream on is the Trinity a mystery? I think we did both. So if you combine those two together with this one, then that should help you out, inshallah.
Inshallah. Abdulrahman, any last comments, points, things that you're doing?
No, just thank you everybody for joining, and thanks. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. Okay, I'm going to try and do this properly, so I'm going to have to do the outro and then end the stream. But Jazakallah khair to everybody who's listening. Hopefully, inshallah, you find it beneficial. You know, we started off relatively, basic, and we started building layers upon these types of discussions. But as Jake mentioned, to reiterate that point, which is that it's really important, because in order to understand and evaluate beliefs, and also in order to understand and evaluate people's arguments, you need to have these types of understandings about what a logical contradiction is. When appealing to mystery, when you accuse somebody of a logical contradiction, you have to demonstrate it. When somebody has been accused and shown a demonstration, he's now under a burden of proof in order to argue against, demonstrate that it isn't a logical contradiction. So hopefully people are aware of these types of things so that they can better understand and evaluate belief systems for themselves. So Jazakallah khair. We will see you hopefully in a couple of weeks' time. Hopefully Yusuf will be with us back then. And Jake, and really quickly, but a lot of people have been requesting us to do open Q&As. Yeah, so maybe next stream we might, rather than just doing a topic, we might just do an open Q&A, because I know a lot of people got loads of questions and they just want to ask us questions. So hopefully you guys will be free for that, inshallah, and we'll do something regards to that. Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.